good evening and welcome to another mapping extravaganza of Callaghan. I'm looking over towards my map over there and getting ready to dive in already. Unlike last time, we know exactly where we're going. We finished off the last stream having just finished off the upper parts of a boggy part of Callaghan, and we're about to move down into some of the lower parts of the boggy part of Callaghan. And it's going to be, as I bring it up on screen in just a moment, particularly easy to hopefully dive in. So let me just pull up my shared screen bit because I've forgotten to do that. And pull that up now. While I do that, I'd like to also say that today I found out that Mystic Meg, which those of you in the UK will know very well, Mystic Meg died at the age of 80 years old. And the reason that I bring her up, and rest in peace, Mystic Meg, is because we referenced Mystic Meg. Well, I referenced Mystic Meg in Enemy in Shadows, the first part of the Enemy Within campaign. When we were going through the development passes for the first book for the Enemy Within, there was a desire to look at all of the NPCs and upgrade them, bring them a little bit more to life, and to also look at some of the holes that may have been present in the original one and what we could do to fill those. For example, instead of just having blanket, there are some seers here doing seery things. We got an actual fortune teller NPC to personify that inside the big market at the Schaffenfest. And that was fun. When I did the commission for the art for that, I think it was Matteo that we commissioned to do that one. I got in contact and I said, here's a bunch of reference images of Mystic Meg. I would like a Warhammer version of that, please. That would be awesome. We had a little discussion about how to do that. And that ended up being Mystic Megret, as she became known inside the Enemy in Shadows book. So there we go. A nice little Mystic Meg snippet. Now, if this is your first time joining us for a stream, loosely speaking, I chat like crazy. I bring up all your comments and then I get to mapping like crazy. If there's anything that you think that I should be adding to the map, just bring it up as a comment, slap it in down at the side. I'll bring it up, we'll discuss it out, and we'll see if it fits in. Now, if I bring up the map, because I haven't done that yet, let's do so. That's where we are. Way, look at that. Now, last week, we were finishing off the section up here. We had all manner of funky, cool ideas. And we're about to move down into this zone here where we already have 2 locations marked that we're going to probably include. And if you've got any other ideas for locations we could put in there, please do put them into the comments and we will add them as we go. Now, as you may note, we have comments coming in and I will bring them up in the stream as go. Yalab says hi. Hello, Yalab. Delighted to see you here. Esty says hi. Hi, everyone. And indeed, hi in return to you. Yalab adds a quick hello, Andy. And, well, probably hi, Andy, and hello, chat. And indeed, hello to all of you. On that, if there's anyone that's got the Discord channel open, that's the Lawhammer Discord channel. If somebody could do a quick post saying, at everybody, Andy's live with a link to wherever we are over on YouTube, that'd be amazing. I completely forgot to put that up because I was too busy messing around with trying to get my Photoshop to work correctly before the stream. So if anyone fancies doing that, that would be amazing. Martin also drops in to say, yeah, indeed, Mystic Meg, it's sad. It's a fun one because, a weird one, pardon me. For me, Mystic Meg is the national lottery, which in the UK became a thing really in the 90s. And Mystic Meg would pop up and do some sort of crazy reading that was all obviously horoscope based and nonsense, saying something like, oh, I imagine such and such is going to be lucky this week. And it was always imaginations of what was coming next. And it was frankly weird, but it pretty much did the UK out of dry ice because it was pouring down with her over her crystal ball, properly daft, which is one of the reasons why we added it to the Enemy Within, because people of a certain generation have her ingrained into their minds if they were in the UK. Anyway, Yalabad's chatting, reading comments, mapping, not necessarily in that order. That's exactly what we do. So please, as I said already, if you do have any comments as we're going along or ideas for things we can add, do drop them in. The vote person drops in and says, hi, everyone. Indeed. Good to see you as well, the bloke person. Delighted you made it. Devin adds, hello, everyone. And hello to you as well, Devin. And indeed, again, delighted you made it. Martin adds, I forget, was this originally intended as a better area that's been waterlogged and slumified? Or, then Martin also adds, has there always been a slum that's now wet and boggy slum? I'll cover that in just a second. And Yalabad's Discord post done. Thank you very much. Amazingly, anyone can at everyone in that server. Hopefully that'll never be abused. Yeah, I know. I've left it open because I know I'm an idiot and sometimes this will happen. I might switch it off if anyone ever does it. But our server's pretty, gosh darn it, tiny. So I have a host of little quick intro stuff. If you've never been in one of our streams before, I'll run them through as quickly as I possibly can. First, there's no link shares in YouTube for people who are watching. So you've got a link that you want everybody to see, pop over to our Discord channel. That's the Lawhammer Discord. I don't have a link I'm setting up. If anybody grabs a link to the Lawhammer Discord, I'll share it up on screen. Drop any comments in there. We've got an entire thread based for it over there. You can pop in any ideas that you might have or pictures that you might want to share with everybody during the course of the stream. Other than that, today we're going to be mapping this boggy area down here. We have two things that are already marked to go in there. One is a rag and bone plaza, i.e. a dumping ground, and the other one is a stonemasons guild that's sunk down. Now, this part of Callaghan, at least the story that we've built so far, was a part of the original camps, stonemasons camps that were helping build the city and expand it significantly during the earlier parts of the current Duke's reign. They're outside the old walls. The old walls are a part of, let me get my brush out so that we can start showing where all these things are, for those of you who have not seen it already. Let me see if I've got a good brush here. That's not going to be very visible, so let's pop up a nice red. So they're outside the old walls, which lead up through this part of the town. And when the expansion went out, all of the extra time, which we're currently working through as we draw just now, you can just about see the new walls as they got put in. The main camps were down here for where all of the workers were. And this area has, over the course of the last couple of decades or so, grown boggier and boggier and worse, largely because a lot of the drainage that used to be in place has been replaced by canal, and that canal doesn't accept any local drainage, so the water is gathering around here and also around the base of this upper area around there. I'm on a closed tab apparently over there. Let me just bring up the shadows for that so you can see it as well. I've got that right down in the bottom layer. There we go. The original elevation shades that we made all the way back in the very first episode when we're doing this, that big 7-hour stream. So you can see that there's a rise here, another rise here. That's a big rock area, another rise over here. And the water used to meander slowly through this area and out there. But when it got replaced by what is now large canals that go all the way back up to the mountains and the mines where all manner of ore is dropped down into Callaghan, which has very much enriched the House Holzkrug, which is the local ruling nobles. Unfortunately, the water no longer drains and has begun to stagnate around this particular area. Whatever housing there was in place has begun to sunk badly. And the further south you go, the worse it gets. With this part of the town right here collapsed to complete bog. This part of the town was originally going to be a relatively rich, well-to-do area. We've got a couple of ideas for locations that are going to go in here already. Housing for the poor, a big mercy house, for example. That was going to be set up by the Cult of Shalia, and that's just completely sunk into the ground. There's very little left of that above ground. Over at this section, it sort of goes downhill in this direction, and the water is gathering more around here and then really, really badly around there. And we've got ourselves a bit of a boggy midden ball field sitting there and a Temple of Sigmar. So cut that all down to its itty-bitty bits. We have a section here that we're about to fill out. It is a mixture of old, probably semi-ruined workhouses, temporary workhouses that were erected by the stonemasons and the builders and carpenters et al. When they were expanding the city significantly when Holzkrug, the current duke, made his major expansion beyond the city walls that his father had expanded up to. And a few newer buildings mixed in there as well, but most of these ones are going to be relatively old in terms of the newer city that we've got more up to the north. So if you've got any ideas for anything that could be added to what is currently the Stonemasons Guild and Rag and Bone Plaza, which is a nice way of saying where all the shit is deposited, that all the detritus, the waste from the city is sort of thrown down there, and it gets picked over by gong farmers, rag and bone men, laborers who currently don't have any work, and other, shall we say, less salubrious types looking to earn whatever pitiful pennies that they can, whatever pfennigs they can gather from the waste from other parts of the town. So that's loosely what we have. We've got a normal expectation of about 4 special locations per area. If I move up the map a little bit, you'll notice that we have a host of purple areas and a host of brown areas in terms of the color of the building. All the brown buildings are just normal buildings of that district as we talk it out as to what the district might look like. And the purple buildings are special locations. Each and every one of those special locations is going to be written up. Each one of those write-ups will probably include a couple of paragraphs, one paragraph describing the location, one paragraph describing primary NPCs, and then I'll probably have a couple of adventure hooks after that as well. So for each area, as we spread out, we generally want about 3 or 4 special locations. Currently, we have 2 for here, so we could probably do with another couple. I imagine that some of this will have turned to wasteland, which is going to make it relatively easy to draw. Woohoo! We can hopefully get through that one relatively quickly. It's possible that some of it may be a bit overgrown. We're also going to have some of the towers down here. We might want to make one of the towers a feature tower. We haven't actually done any of the primary city wall towers yet as feature towers. We've only got the forts on the outside. So perhaps one of these has got a special reason to be marked out in purple because it's, I don't know, all the classic stuff. Haunted, or perhaps it's beginning to collapse, and there's all manner of shoring up going on, or perhaps it's something else. Perhaps it's crooked. Perhaps it's the Leaning Tower of south of Callaghan, or whatever else it may be. If anyone's got any ideas for what that might be, throw it down into the comments, and we'll bring them up in chat. Right, so I'm going to get myself ready. So I've got all my brushes in place, so I can just get diving in with the actual drawing, and that's me largely in place now. I'm going to, before I bring up the comments for the ideas that we've got for this section, just very quickly, no, that's a little bitty big for the walls, just very quickly drop in a quick line. Now, the techniques that I'm using for this one were all covered in one of the Rookery's tutorials. If you are aware of Rookery publications, if not, do yourself a quick check up. We're on social media all over the place. And we did a tutorial in the Patreon for the Rookery where I explained exactly how to do a map like this, looking exactly like this. I'm about to put up another 4 tutorials over there, which are going to be spread over the course of the next 2 months, where I'm going to be taking everybody through basic core concepts for maps. I had quite a few chats with a bunch of different people, and lots of people were looking for specific things like, could we please explain how to do a dungeon, or can you explain how to do, I don't know, a particular townhouse? But most of the maps that we were getting sent to us or were arriving were overland area maps. So I'm going to break down the core components of overland area maps. So trees, mountains, you know, the normal stuff. And I'm going to break that up into 4 separate tutorials and show 7 ways to do mountains, for example, 7 ways to do trees, ranging from very simple to slightly more complex, so that you get yourself a nice mixture of different styles that you can attempt to do on your maps at home. These will be techniques that you can do either physically using pen and ink, or alternatively, if you want to do them digitally. So that's a fun thing, what we are planning to do. I've got the ads already built for that. I just haven't posted it over on Patreon. I will add one other thing as well. This Saturday, we're going to be speaking to Andy Hall over in the Rookery. If you know Andy Hall, he's a smashing bloke. He used to work at Games Workshop Studio doing White Dwarf, various games of, he did specialist games for ages as well. But he's currently the head writer over at Creative Assembly. So that's Total War Warhammer for all of you wargaming aficionados on your PCs. He wrote 1, 2, and 3, and he's popping along to discuss adapting Warhammer. I'm really looking forward to that because Andy's awesome. And that'll be Saturday at 7 o'clock. If you'd like to go and watch this, I'll probably be putting a link up that for tomorrow, because that's when they asked for it to go up. So we're going to be popping that up tomorrow, and we'll share that all over Heather and Yawn. There should be links all over the place in social media. Anyway, let's go jump into our comments. Martin says the mods are fierce. Oh, they totally are. Those mods over there on our Discord channel, totally fierce. Heron pops in and says good evening. Oh, good evening to you as well, Heron. Yalabads, I wonder if you mod someone in YouTube chat They may be able to post links. Yeah, they may be. Might even be worth checking that out. I'll do that after the stream today. I don't want to get caught dithering around, looking around settings just now. But I think that's definitely worth doing. But having them in Discord is also sort of useful. Yes, it is. Yeah, then adds, the good old times of 7-hour streams. Good. One of the 7-hour streams actually scored me 1, 2, 3 different interviews because one was just caught me and we're like, oh, that's really nice. I'd like to interview. And I was like, that's great. Another one wanted to interview me purely to ask how I managed to do a 7-hour stream without breaking once. And I told them the true answer for that one was Games Day, because I was so busy at Games Day one year and I just apparently have stamina. Anyway, Martin, oh no, I didn't pop up that one there. Jalabads, I forget if we've talked about it at any point. Are there locks in the canal? Yes, there are, but I think further up. Presumably the mountains are at a higher elevation, much higher elevation. In fact, to discuss that, why don't we take a quick look at the reference map? Because I've not looked at that for a wee while. And it's worth having a go. Now, the reference map's drawn from my, I owe you a map, Yalab. I'll bring that up because I purposely found one. I just haven't posted it yet. Here we go. There's Callaghan sitting in the corner of my reference. The map is from my master map, which is a map of the entire empire done to this level of detail, drawing upon sources from all of Games Workshop's various outputs over the course of the last 3 decades or so. And Callaghan is right here, looking pretty there in the middle. And it's got, you can see, I'm on the wrong layer. Let me just bring it up. You can see there's a major, it's a tiny brush. Let's change that color. There's a major lock system there, major lock system there, and then we're moving up. But there's also probably a few other locks on the in-between. Lock systems are marked on the map at various intervals, the primary ones. That's where you get your lock houses. We added a lock house, as I recall, to one of the buildings of the Reichland supplements if you're looking to get an example of what a lock house might look like. Martin then adds, I was thinking of an eccentric collector of knowledge. His once many-tiered house listing and subsiding, the arcana, scrolls, and books in the lower layers claimed by mold and slime. Yeah, that sounds like a good thing to add. Particularly given that this housing down at the south of the city at one point would have been considered to be a relatively good buy before all the sitting water, well, sat and no longer drained out. So I think that's quite a nice one. It might be better slightly further in the south rather than the current area that we're about to do. What do you think about that? Devon adds, I like the idea of some sort of water damage to the base of the walls. I do too. Thinking of a Helm's Deep's drain sort of thing. We could even have it as a potential weak point down there. If anyone's got an idea for how we could best build the story for that, do drop it in as a comment. Martin adds, maybe a local speciality are cellar oysters. Cellar oysters. The lowest floors of the building sinking into the boggy ground have become an ideal breeding area for the bivalves. You know what? I quite like the idea of some sort of crazy little farm sitting down here. An industry that's being... Well, if you consider that this is going to be quite a poor part, who's going to be in command of that? I imagine some sort of merchant from elsewhere is going to be supplying the oysters to more reputable areas, or assuming that we stick with oysters. And they'll be employing some local folks and some guards to protect them. An opportunity for some conflict between the local money and the local people who have no money. Something to steal, which is always good. Perhaps they're a bit of a delicacy down here as well because you find them amongst parts of the bog. So finding one's a good thing. Do you eat it? Do you sell it? There could be something in that. So if you've got any other ideas to add to that, do drop it in. I quite like that one. Oxecutor. Hello, Oxecutor. Delighted to see her. First time I've been able to watch one of these lives. Well, I am delighted that you made it live. Do feel free to throw in all the ideas. You have then added, I only started at the weekend. Oh my. And you're at part 7 already. Well done. I mean, if you only started at the weekend, there must be there's a lot of hours of stream up there. Were you playing at multiple speed? Martin then adds, there's a trade to be had in pickling the oysters in local brine. Where are we getting the brine from? I'd be interested in what your thoughts are on that, given that we're in a freshwater system. Even the bog, if it goes still a freshwater system. So where do you think the brine's coming from? I'm burning the shells to create lime. I like that. An essential material for mortar. In fact, that may be one of the reasons why the camp sited down here, because originally there was some sort of boggy area that already had the necessary local flora and fauna to support what they were doing. And part of that fauna may have been some sort of oyster shell-based nonsense that they were then able to use to help build their own mortar. Yeah, I think that works really quite nicely. Yalabadza, yay! I'm presuming that's to Oxecutor arriving. I'm going to guess. I hope so, because that's nice. Nico, hello, Nico. Delighted to see you made it. Superb. Lovely to see you dropped into the screen. Wolfsbane drops in too. It says evening. Actually made it live for a change. Oh, it's quite bustling out there. As I said multiple times earlier, if you've got any ideas for what we're about to do, throw them on the screen. I'm looking for at least 2 more ideas for something to drop into number 2 boggy area. So if you've got anything that you think would work, that'd be awesome. Yalbads, I don't think how to sink that fast would be a poor collector to not move their collection to higher levels or even fully elsewhere. Which collector are we talking about here? I'm not quite sure which one that you're referencing. I'm almost certainly, having discussed it like 2 minutes ago, forgotten already. Martin adds, might be getting ahead of myself. Both locations probably better in Area 3. Yes, I think so. Area 3 is where it's really sunk. And if that's what you're referencing, yes, I agree. I think that's where we really want to have it properly sunk down. And it started off relatively slow, and then it just bogged up bad. And your average 1-story house is mostly gone. Your average 2-story house might be a half to a 1-story. A 3-story house, just the weight of it, might have pulled it all the way down just to a single story. And there's all manner of different adventure hooks that we could almost certainly build for that. Yalab then adds, either that or locals growing the oysters illegally on the down low. I think that's definitely worth doing. Because you're always looking for conflict between the classes, whether that's the mercantile class who are looking to corner that particular market, or the lower class folks who are looking to, well, just survive. I definitely think that's worth doing. Hernads, I've been playing a lot of More Time in the PC recently. Fun game. Perhaps the residents have created their own streets and pathways through bridges connecting to the upper levels. You know, I quite like that idea as well. Perhaps we could use that for the truly boggy area, and give the idea that the part 2 boggy area, I imagine most of this is probably going to be shored up with planks of wood that they can walk along. So you get more of that idea in boggy area number 2. And then when we go to boggy number 3, we can properly sink it down, possibly have walkways and passageways between them for the people who are living in the upper floors, living in probably mold-infested horror shows of buildings, which is always fun. Martin adds, given the proximity of the dumping ground, maybe a connection to a beggar gang or a leader. Not a bad idea. Oxecutor says, working from home, listening more than watching. Fully understand, Oxecutor. Martin then adds, salt from the mines. Well, I say salt, it's a mineral. That's got a bit of a zing to it. Yeah, it'd be lovely. I mean, salt is relatively expensive in the local area. So I imagine they're not going to want to just be ditching it. But if it's a byproduct, if, for example, from resolving some of the ores that they have, and it's just been ditched into the local water or something equivalent, that might work really well. Or alternatively, it could just be that there is a salty wash that's coming down. But again, I think it's more likely to be a fresh water area. Is there a rubbish dump in the town yet? Can imagine a bog area would be used. Yeah, Oxecutor, we're going to be adding one up here. It's currently marked with my incredibly bad scribbles as the Rag and Bone Plaza, which was originally a large working area that all the builders were using when they were expanding the city out. It's become a plaza over time, and then it began to sink. And then as this became a poorer quarter of the town, this last 15, 20 years, it's where a lot of the dump from the city has been dropped, and the poorer folks often pick through it, and that's begun to pile up and stink quite badly. So that's quite fun. It then gets probably shipped out one fashion or another out towards the rivers. Martin adds, oysters are considered a luxury item now, but in ages past they were just a local food source. Absolutely, and I completely agree. But again, I'm not sure we're going to have them all the way up here, but if you think that they fit, say so. Devin and Dad thought I remember something about flower patches run by street kids near the boggy area from an earlier stream. I quite like the idea of that too. They're more likely to be up at this end because this is the end that's a little where the ground levels is higher and it's not completely sunk through. I mean, it's dry enough that we've got ourselves a midden ball field here. And that's not completely collapsed to water, where when we go south of that into this area here, it largely has. So I'm going to start moving into this because we've got some ideas already building up, and I'd like to get into. Which bits do I want to remove? I want to remove that gigantic 2 and boggy, and Rag and Bone Plaza. Let's just sketch out the loose area that that's going to be in. Am I on the right level? Yes, I am. So I'm thinking around about that sort of size for the old work plaza, which may have there might be detritus, not just from the fact that it's been turned into a dumping ground in modern times, but in the past, perhaps this is where a lot of the stone was gathered and packed and sat off to the corners. So there's still piles sitting around these areas that we can work from. Old Foreman buildings, working from there, and then we move into the old workman ruins on all sides. So I think there's probably something to do with that. Our Stonemasons Guild, that was suggested, as I recall, by Martin in the last stream. If you've got any ideas for what we could do with that, Martin, or indeed anyone else, now's the time to drop it in. I think most of the extra ideas we've had so far are better for down there, although we do have the potential for kids doing some sort of growing, stealing, or equivalent. We already have a kids gang up here, though, so I'm not entirely convinced we necessarily want to have another one right here. So environmental connection to a local apothecary paying kids to gather plants. Yes, there absolutely is. The ascent, we've got the apothecary up in the section just up here. The apothecary building is this one here, if you can see that on the screen. Yeah, this is separately from the Skaven Spy using local children as informers. Absolutely. Martin Root forgot about that. Yeah, quite. It's already passed by. It was almost a whole week ago when we were discussing this. Maybe there's a patch of land that by ancient charter that was well outside those city walls was a Strigony caravan camp. Interesting. Now, the Strigony are a particularly hopeless folk that we have to be sort of careful with using because they do tend to lapse into racial stereotypes. We were even, when we were building, for example, Looks Could Kill, the very first adventure that we built for Fantasy Roleplay 4, there was a period where we weren't even going to use them. But that adventure was written so quickly to such a tight deadline that once it was all in place, it was very difficult to say, do we want to remove them when it would have added an extra week's worth of work to a product that needs to be turned over quickly? Because it wasn't actually the first adventure that was supposed to be written. We had another adventure already lined up and written before that, but the author pulled out because of personal reasons, meaning that we were left high and dry without the adventure in place. So we commissioned another one. We got Dave Allen in to do the first treatment of that. And then B. Sherry and I did the second treatment of that. And the Strigony conversation was a whole conversation as to exactly how we wanted to or not include them. And as I recall, we did include them when we went over to Hugeldal, for example, just outside Ubersreich. They were mentioned there too. We could have them inside the walls, but the stigma that is attached to them because of their ties to vampires means that they're almost certainly going to be driven out. The likelihood of them having an ancient charter is possible, but I will add one other small thing, and that's that this entire area, let me just get me a big brush and make it nice and clear. Before the expansion for the city went, pretty much all of this was trees. So this was deeply forested area before it was cleaned out. So the likelihood of a clearing is possible, but I'm iffy. If anyone can build a good story for that, I'm well up for it, but we'd need a good story, particularly because a Strigony camp might be of a particular size, and we've already got not quite enough room for everything we're necessarily going to build into this area here. Next, items long forgotten about, says Martin. Absolutely. Stonemasons Guild is struggling to keep up with demand. The Duke has upset many promising riches from grand projects and never quite hit the mark. I think that's fair, and I think that the Guild would like to site elsewhere, but just doesn't have the money to do so, particularly given that the Duke is no longer funneling funds into construction projects, meaning the money over the course of the last decade or so has dried up as more important things in terms of the overall politics for the Reichland and House Hallskrug have come to the fore, and where beforehand he was super into building palaces and extra houses and helping fund great public works, that money has dried up. So we can use the Stonemasons Guild as a walking example of the effect that has had on the local populace of a certain class. Bloat Person adds, you mentioned a few streams ago that the city could have a number of vampires. Yes, we did. Could one perhaps be dwelling in the Rag and Bone, perhaps a necrarch who's gone a bit gaga and is hoarding trash in waterlogged abode in the center of it, leading to many missing peasants. The nobility certainly don't care, but the Morians and Shalians certainly might. Yes, they would. If we're doing that, I think to reinforce the difference between both areas, I might be more inclined to drop it more into the boggy area, purely because this area is going to be relatively open, as in the Rag and Bone area and its surrounds. Old, dodgy, broken down buildings that over the course of the last couple of decades have collapsed to mostly ruin. They're skeletal frames picked apart so that buildings elsewhere can have their parts, and including repurposing from the guilds as well, particularly the Stonemasons Guild. So this area is going to be relatively open in comparison to the south, and if we have something like a Neckcrutch working out from the bogs, then it can slide right underwater into the horrible marshy bits underneath, and down there, though not needing to breathe as it doesn't, be in a far better state. You could also go for perhaps a Strigoi or some equivalent, perhaps as a better alternative. Yeah, I think there's potentially quite a lot in that. If you've got a nice story for how that might go, I'm well up for it. I've already brought that one. And then finally, Martin's on. Meanwhile, the state of the city wall in the waterlog area is worrying. I agree. The Guildmaster is quite young and feeling the strain. Yeah, I think all of those are good things. I think there could be a generational thing with the Guildmaster. I think that that's worth plumbing into a little bit more. Why, if he's young, has he managed to secure himself a position in one of the most up-and-coming cities in the entirety of the Empire? There would need to be a reason. Perhaps he's the son of the old Guildmaster from before, or alternatively, perhaps the guild is led by a Guildmaster who is almost geriatric now. He was old when he first took the job when the workhouses were built here, and now he's ancient and incapable of running the guild himself. So perhaps his second, who's a young man, is the man who's doing it all and struggling massively because he doesn't have any of the real authority that would come along with being Guildmaster, but he still has to get all the work done. And when that's compounded with the fact that most of the guild members are complaining and bitching to all hells because they're not getting the funds that they were getting previously, promises have been broken. They might have been bound into contracts that they have no real interest in concluding anymore because the buildings that are half built are no longer getting the funds towards them. We could even have some people perhaps almost bonded like slaves because of the large temple of Verena. Perhaps some of them have contracts saying that they can't leave until the temple's finished, but the funds have completely dried up for that, leaving them stuck in the city with possibly turning to drink over work. There could be all sorts of fun things. We've got people who are going to be attracted here 15 to 20 to 30 years ago, and having some sort of reflection of where they are nowadays would be a good thing, I think. All right. We also have, if only they could attract some dwarf masons up for your dwarves again, I see there. Yeah, then damn, you're pushing strong for them dwarves. Yes, he is. Executor then adds, is it boggy because all the trees have been cut? Yes, that's part of it. And it's the old bog and floodplain. And the trees used to keep the ground stable. Yeah, that's almost exactly it. It's not the Bogan floodplain. There used to be a river that made its way down here, which has been completely bricked and blocked off into a canal system, so there's no longer proper drainage. And when you compound that with the fact that there's no longer any trees at all, it's been completely opened up there, and we are sitting between large areas that are uplands, in that they're a bit hillier to either side. It's just a natural place for water to gather, and there's no longer a clear way for it to get out. So it's gathering and sinking, and every time there's a big rainstorm, there's just more water down there. And I imagine the walls that are making it their way around this part are not in a good state. Esty then adds, we had some talk about Skaven in town last week. Yes, we did. Reading about Clan Scrap gave me the loose idea that one of the factions could be a singular mad Skaven, an exile perhaps, who is pretending to be a grey seer. It has bleached its own fur and wears furry horns. Now the Skaven don't believe it, no great surprise, but they daren't kill it and are very careful when working in opposition to its objectives. He then adds, this singular Skaven could then really only be here precisely because there are so few others here and just wants to run the others out of town. The others that have been sent by a clan from under Altdorf to investigate whether Callaghan has any resources that could give them an advantage, and we're very surprised to find the Grey Seer. I think there's potentially an idea in that in a standing NPC. That one needs to be dropped into the Discord channel as a potential character. I'm not sure that one would necessarily work as a location because he would definitely be the sort that would be on the move. But I think there could be quite a lot of attraction in that as an NPC that could play around, particularly given that we've already discussed Skaven of several factions coming into Callaghan, desperate to try and influence a city that has no sewer system, has no easy way in for the Skaven, is not connected to the Under Empire, meaning that they're having to work above ground, something that they are deeply uncomfortable with as a species. And whilst there may be individuals who can go quite used to that form of life, as a general species, it's going to be a tough ask. We already have at least one Skaven that's working out from down this part of town, and he has gathered, I presume it's a he because almost all Skaven are, not the big brood mothers, and he has gathered himself a host of effectively child informants, and he's been here for a while. We're probably looking at least 20, 30 years, and he has managed to get some of his old crew that were kids about 20, 30 years ago and get them out into other important parts, meaning that he's got himself effectively a ring of informants across the city, somewhat similar to what you may require if you're in the spy career, which I think would be a natural place for that particular Skaven to reside. Yeah, then that also adds, pardon me, that could possibly even be the one using the child informers. I don't think so. I think the one using the child informers is not stupid enough to try and pretend to be a Grey Seer. That's just beyond stupid. That's going to get you killed. And the second a Grey Seer comes through this place, that's game over for that particular Skaven. He's dead. And Skaven have very short lifespans for a reason. They'll have no compunction in just hunting him down and killing him. So he would have to be relatively canny, but not necessarily intelligent. And possibly his story could be expanded to make it make a little bit more sense in terms of how he could have survived for any length of time. You've got to remember those Skaven aren't the longest lived of creatures. We have Martin then saying, what's natural lifespan of Skaven, given that they don't reach a natural end? It's not that long. We discussed this actually in one of the previous streams, where most Skaven rarely get past the age of 4 or 5, largely because their society is just so bloodthirsty and backstabby. The general perceived thing behind the scenes when we were discussing it is they generally don't live past about 20 years with a natural life cycle, but so many Skaven don't have natural life cycles because they've got so much technology is not quite the right word, but they can refine warpstone to provide geriatric purposes, allowing them to live significantly beyond their mortal years. And indeed, for some of them, they've lived for thousands of years. Some of the oldest Grey Seers have been sitting around for what feels like ever. And the Council of 13 are pretty much all ancient, except for 1 or 2 new incumbents. So, yeah, Skaven can live for a very long time or really not. So you've got quite a lot of flexibility when you're using the species. You can have them working within their natural lifespans or trying to trade with the Under Empire to get hold of warp tokens so that they can then get the necessary geriatric warpstone refinement that they require. Wolfsbane then adds there, could there be any peat cutting, leaving scars in the bogs and making the ground stability even worse? I'm not sure that this place would necessarily have peat. It's not been a long-standing bog. This is a relatively new development on the bog front. We're not talking about sort of like the flowlands where I used to come from at the very north of Scotland, where the peat had been there for pretty much ever. And it seems relatively unlikely we'd be looking at a peaty area here. But again, if anyone has any different preferences in that, do drop it in his comment. Then Martin adds, maybe outside the walls, that is causing more flooding. I mean, we could have some sort of area that was like that, but that would have suggested that this particular part wouldn't have had as much trees. It would be a slightly different biome to the one that I'm currently imagining, but I'm not against that being the case. It's just when you have an idea in your head, when someone puts a contrary one, your first thought is, but it's not that. But I think it could easily be that. So if anyone's got any preference for that, do drop it in his comments. I'm now going to move in and start working on dropping in some actual work into this, because if I don't start, I'll just sit here chatting along with the comments. So I'm going to immediately jump into this part. We've got ourselves I'm on the wrong color. We've got ourselves the main canal, which makes its way down here. I'm just going to quickly line that. We've got our stonemasons. They're going to be taking some material from that, so we could extend the stonemason guild in this direction slightly, extend their land down towards the edge of the canal, perhaps drag the canal in slightly here so that a barge could drop in. If we bring up the scale, view extras, I can give the scale for that. So I'll mark the scale on so those of you who are actually watching and not just listening in the background can see it. So I might actually just drop one here. That's a 10 yard by 10 yard box. That's approximately 9 meters by 9 meters. I'm working in yards because Imperial system is, well, it's the Empire. So that'd be 20 yards. If we're looking at your typical relatively long barge, we might want to make that a touch longer to get it into place. So let's make that just a wee bitty longer. So we've got an area for the barges to drop. Back when the Stonemasons Guild was arguably much more important, and they were taking stone down from the surrounding mountains, the Herzogschwert, I think it was called. I can't recall off the top of my head. Let's just add a little bit of water to that as well. Drop that in there. It's the wrong color, but I can fix that afterwards. Or just fix it now like that. Okay, so that expands that out just a little. We have ourselves a small area between the bridge here and our pretty much well-to-do buildings on this side. That area there might be relatively rich by comparison to the remaining parts of this section. So we might want to have maybe warehouses, maybe an office or something there. If anyone has any ideas for that. So let me just quickly pop in a couple of loose ideas for what could be there. A main building going off, possibly with a nice frontage to the side there, leading off towards that. Maybe a couple of smaller warehouses. Let's have a look at the small warehouses that we built all the way over here. Now, these were quite small. Some of them probably sheds for smaller vessels. So let's mirror some of those sizes into place there. As we then move into the poorer part of town here, let's just quickly mark the edge of that road there. And then we've got to figure out where our loose roads go here now. So I'm going to pop those on. And then once I've done that, I'm going to look at the comments, see if there's any new ideas for anything to go in that area. And then I'm just going to start blocking it in properly. So let's get ourselves a bigger brush for marking that in. So we've got a plaza. That's basically just one giant road, which we're going to cover in all manner of horror. We're going to have a road that goes down that way. The original connection would have gone there, but it's been half built over. We're going to have meandering roads making their way through. This entire area is going to be flattened out for what is effectively an open-air store yard for stone. We've got another main road that originally went over to the square and will also almost certainly be taking a lot of the detritus of the city from it. So from this direction, main thoroughfare down to there, and from that direction, any that are coming from this side will come across down that way too. So I don't need to add an extra road. We'll have a loose meandering path going down there. Some just almost footpaths that are growing out of this, and we'll put buildings in between them. We go down the edge of the road. Has anybody had an idea for a potential tower location that we could use there? We'll spread out some of that there too. Down towards the Middenball field. A little bit. Oh, I see we've got, that goes into the back of the barge building. And we don't have much in the way. Do we want to have that? I think I want to have a bit more water in there. So I'm going to just quickly add that in as well. So that we can, let's just make that slightly brighter. There we go. So for the barge building area, and then we can connect that through to there as well. There we go. Let's get back to our roads again. Sort of working their way through. So yeah, this place is probably going to be a mixture of ruins, a couple of bogs. Let's add in a little bit of standing water in a few places, just to give the idea that this isn't entirely solid ground, and we can possibly have a couple of buildings half sunk into a few of those. Right, that'll probably do as a loose shape. I quite like the idea of this place being significantly more wendy and windy than the slightly more salubrious uphill slum. Yeah, I think that's working quite well. I shall quickly check our comments. Oxecutor adds, maybe in Bog 3 in the early days of the second great expansion before the location of the new outer wall was decided, but after the felling, a farmer claimed or bought a bit of land, built a farmhouse, built a windmill, now wonky windmill, as it's tilted by substance, and with all the struts and rope holding up the longhouse up, it looks a bit like a sunken boat. That'll make Yalab happy, since we literally have a boathouse up there, and he almost died. He hated it that much, which of course will make me smile. I think that's a good idea, Executor. Let's add that bad boy in down here. Again, though, I think that's probably down in the boggy part. Although maybe we could add it here. That might work quite here. If I turn that into water, we can have the bottom part of it sunk into that. And we could have that maybe there. So we're looking at a half leaning mill. But if we're doing a mill, I mean, a bit like a big windmill. Yeah, I think that could actually work quite well. What would be the local wind table? So that'd be coming from that side. So it's most likely, but it'll be movable. Yeah, we could possibly have a Marienburger responsible for it, reinforcing the idea of that slightly Dutch feeling angle. And also adding the idea of water mixing with them as a species, pardon me, as a people. But that's definitely not something I'm particularly strong on. That's just, whoa, that's an enormous brush. That's not what I want. 4. Okay, cool. Right, so let me just check the other comments before I move on. Right, where were we? Sculptors' workshops. For where exactly do you think, Martin? We've already covered that one. Most been ads for a tower. How about an old half-collapsed bell tower? We could have it as a warning. I mean, the problem is that we actually have a rise over here. So if you're looking for a lookout tower at the top of this section here, makes much more sense than down here, which is all in a dip. There's going to, most of the bell towers are going to be, we've got a bell tower here, for example, at the top of the Temple of Sigmar, and that's going to be also responsible for keeping time locally. So I'm not sure if an old bell tower makes sense. This area here is not much older than 30 years in total with all of its building. So 30 years isn't exactly old. I'm not sure, but if you've got a good idea for what might work there, let's go for it. Jimmy's dropped in. Hey, Jimmy, great to see you there. I am a bit late, understandable. We're all a bit late here. In my defense, I was playing Dying Light 2. Still not played it. Is it a good game? Is it worth my time? I do love myself a bit of Bam Bang Zombie. But if you think it's worth it, do tell me. Right, so I think we've not really added anything particularly strong more up here. So I'm just going to start with what we already have. Before I do, I'll just check what Martin said. Sorry, it was my response to that corner between the two stonemasons and the warehouses. Gotcha. So maybe a sculptor's workshop inside that area. Not a bad idea. Perhaps it could be an old one, though. So an old sculptor. He came here when he was maybe in his 30s. So he'll now, right when this particular part of the town was building, the excitement that would have been in Altdorf for this great municipal, let's say, project that's building over here in the Duchy of Hallskrug. People looking to move out and make their name, probably strike forth from guild restrictions. And he moved down, worked with the local guilds, and he's now in his 60s. So some sort of cool story for him could be an awful lot of fun. Jimmy says regarding good old blasting away with zombies, it can be a time sponge and a good half hour to. I'm not sure I need more games. I have so many of them. And like an idiot, I very recently decided to go back to playing The Witcher, and was reminded just how good it actually is. This is going to be our stonemasons. Let's give it a front area where they're going to be doing taking the stone in. Probably goes through to the back with a back gate as well. An awning down that side. Yeah, that'll do. We don't want a particularly complicated building for this one. The idea, it's got frescoes out to the front. that have been carved. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so I've got an idea for that one. Let's have a look at our Stonemasons Guild now. If anyone's got any idea for anything that could be included in the building and exactly how this should be constructed, do drop it in now, because I'm about to fill in the core detail for that here. I'm going to make it a bit of a leaning building. I'm going to make the roof a bit saggy and broken, which of course betrays quite a bit about their particular story. Fencing down that side, gate going across. This will be where a lot of the old stone is held. Bollards for tying things up to, presumably not people. Okay, cool. We're going to look over at these little warehousey bits here as well and start filling out those. Excellent. Right. It being Thursday, Lindsay, who any of you who follow the Rookery stuff will know very well, she's out doing sword swishing this evening, which is one of the reasons why I do this on Thursdays. The reason that I do the mapping is because I'm going to be using these maps myself for the stream when we're playing the Enemy Within. And House Hallskrug is absolutely essential to how I see the Enemy Within resolving. It's not the most important family in the Empire by a significant measure, even though it is arguably one of the most important families in the Reichland. But it's very important for how certain parts of the Enemy Within will play out. As I say, for my version of how the Enemy Within is going to be played anyway. We're going to be playing tomorrow, filming again tomorrow, seeing how that goes. Our first one didn't go so well, not because what we were doing didn't work, it's because the bloody cameras weren't doing everything I wanted. I've got an issue with one of them just being an arse. My main camera, which is pointing towards me, has just decided to die because, you know, that's what you need when you're doing a live stream. And one of the cameras that I intended to use for the overhead maps just is also refusing to play ball on my laptop. Works totally fine on this computer through here. Slap it on my laptop, absolutely refuses it. And if anyone's thinking, well, maybe it's because the laptop is less powerful, quite the opposite is the case. The laptop's almost twice as powerful as this PC, which is kind of funny because this is the one that I do most of my work on. Okay, we've got an idea of what that place looks like. Let's connect some of these with roads. I'm imagining this is mostly open ground here. A quick dockland. And I imagine it turns to loose ground and scrub at the back there with perhaps a half-built lot. Broken down bits of building. I think most of this area is going to be kind of empty because it will provide a nice strong contrast with the next area along. Rickety buildings, some of them in piles. In fact, I might just fill this entire area. Piled up shanties, leaning bits of wood, stone where it can be gathered. At most 2 floors, but most of them just being a floor. All a bit messy. What would have been workman cottages about 20 years ago has just turned into a bit of a shambles there. Let's put a couple of smaller buildings there. I'm going to go check the comments in a moment, but I imagine given the nature of what we're currently doing, there won't be a lot. If you've got anything though that you think I should be including in this area, now's the time to say so. So far we've got 1, 2, 3, probably 4 purple locations, which I'm actually quite happy with. This is going to be our large half subsided
windmill, which is attached and held in place with guys. It being a Warhammer 1, you need to have some sort of tower on the top of it. If you don't, is it even really a Warhammer building? Right down into the sewer area, parts of it broken, something rising out of that, not the sewer, pardon me, the boggy, marshy area there. Surround that there. Yeah, I can sort of see how that area works. Okay, yeah, that'll look better once it's filled in. Get a feel for this area. I'm doing that thing that I tend to do when I'm building my maps, and I start thinking about what the street looks like from above, from the side. I'm going to put lots of just loose wooden bits. Now, again, I've mentioned this in previous streams. When you're making maps, your job isn't to make something that's 100% accurate. Your job is to make something that's evocative of the place and also usable. Usable is a big one. Now, in reality, this entire place here is going to be planked out. There's going to be some areas that are graveled up, shored up with the waste stone. Perhaps it's come from the stonemasons. Other parts of it are going to be potentially originally cobbled over by this area as the stonemasons put things into place. But if I do that, it'll be almost unreadable. It will blend into all the houses, and all these bits of wood will look like houses. So you're often better just dropping it at the side of the road so that the roads can scan super easily for when people are using the map themselves during a game. Let me just quickly do that. Right, so I drop a little circular bit there for another bit of water. Some poor idiot who lives in a hovel beside that. Now, last week, we only did one section. I would like to sort of power through this section and get as much of it done as we possibly can. And I would really like to get into Bog 3 down there as well, as it's currently called, because it would be really nice to have finished the majority of our slumland area here so we can see how it looks and compares with the other slums that we've got up close to the old original village over towards the west of the city. I think this is probably going to be rough land. Yeah, and then a larger building here. And again, I'm going to drop in a sort of broken look. Now, as I've discussed in previous streams, the style of this map is very much designed to be loose, free, not too tidy. The original tutorial for this one was to try and show that anybody could build a map that looked pretty goddamn gorgeous. So reinforcing that and making sure that the techniques were simple, messy, easy to duplicate was a part of that tutorial. So if you're trying to do something like this yourself, as Lindsay often says, it's just an awful lot of slightly squint boxes. And I say often, she's not wrong. The entire Freeport map, the one that's up behind me up there, was pretty much done using almost this style. I used a few more brushes on that one than I did with this one. And also didn't use, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, I didn't use any fonts at all. I hand drew every single last piece of writing on that one, which, by the way, sucked. I mean, it gave it a nice look in the end, but it sucked. It was an awful lot more work than I would have preferred. It looked great when it was done, and it gave it a slightly more, I don't know, hand-drawn feel. I mean, it's a digital map. That much is absolutely certain. But it looked a little bit less digital than it might have otherwise. There we go. Yeah, we're getting there. There's quite a lot on this. I'm going to go through the comments because there's quite a lot of writing in this one. Yalab says he's popped off for 10 minutes to fry some chicken. God, don't make me hungry. I didn't have tea before this stream started, so I'm actually quite hungry. A crane. Yeah, where should we put it, Executor? I think that's a good idea. A relatively large one. Perhaps down by the Stonemasons Guild, because they'd have been using it for moving a lot of the heavy stone around. So perhaps a crane, and maybe even a collapsed crane, just on the outside down here somewhere, because that could give it an extra bit of character. Martin adds, an Umgi attempt to mimic dwarf stonework, which actually acts as a natural repellent to dwarf masons. Well, we all know how much dwarf masons do love human masons. Yalabads, also, I'm not sure how someone would sneak in a farm in this area in the 5-year time span between the erection proclamation being issued by Lightman and the entirety of a new wall being completed. I think that does seem unlikely we'll get a whole farm in there. Erection proclamations, what have you missed? You've missed all the erections, Jimmy. Maybe not for the first time. Yalab then adds, as for the earlier idea for this area being a swamp in the past, if it were a swamp, there wouldn't be put a canal through it. Yes, I agree. That would be absolute hell. The forest area works better, and I think I agree. Okay, so no more ideas for this area, so I'm just going to jump in and continue with what I've got. Make this area quite tight with buildings, mirroring the sort of tone and feel for the part that we have above. While we're here, I think an extra potentially interesting side location would be the Empire, as we all know, is polytheistic. I'm going to move my camera slightly because I'm actually over here. I'm not over where it thinks I am. That's better. Yeah, the Empire is polytheistic. And there are far, far, far more gods than the 10, 12 that are commonly featured as the core go-to gods for each location. Now, we know there's lots of minor gods that you've seen pop up in a variety of ways. When I was writing the core book sections for the Reichland, I made sure that we dropped in at least 3 or 4 of the local gods and actually wrote a little section detailing the fact that there's always local gods as well. To try and reinforce that. But one of the things I like to do whenever we're adding new locations is go, well, what sort of local deity should we reinforce here? Is there anything that we would drop in here? Is there some form of stonemasons deity or an equivalent? Who are the masons worshipping? Who are they turning to in these dark times when money has become significantly less free and flowing than it was a few years earlier, even 5 years earlier? So is there any other deities we should drop in? Do we have some sort of a Dairath cult, for example? We've already discussed the potential for Katya. She's further up in north in the city. But there are many other gods that are prevalent across not just the Reichland, but the Empire as a whole that we could drop in. If any of you have the Tome of Salvation, there's like a big pile. Pardon me. Oh dear, I've probably got COVID again. I better not have COVID again. For those of you who don't know, I've had COVID 5 times. And the first time almost killed me. Literally almost died. I do not recommend doing that. That was before there was handy vaccines to make us feel not like we're about to die. It was not a good time. I couldn't move for around about 6 months. That kind of put a stymie on everything that I was planning at the time. And I'm just now feeling like I'm almost back to, if not good health, then at least health. All right, so we've got ourselves another little pondy bit there. Let's make this mostly ruins at the back. Collapsed chimney stack over there. We also have our crane sitting there. Pop out over the water so you can get the idea of a bit of depth there. And we have another one, perhaps half collapsed, that once was a crane, no longer is. A large ruin weight still down at that end. It'll have been picked apart as well for pieces. See if there's any comments as I'm working my way through. Only one. Excellent. Yab says, pretty sure Jimmy is at a point in life where missing some erections is to be expected. Harsh. I'm not saying anything to that other than harsh. All right, there we go. As a small aside, since I'm just doing some drawing here, I'm not actually having much of a discussion in terms of what's going on it. We're about to hand over a bunch of goodies over to Erin. She is going to be doing a quick film for us to open up the Lawhammer streams. Goodness knows what she's going to do. You might know Erin's work already. She was hired by me to do the art for, say, Klumpenkrog. And very recently, the Lustria book had one of her pieces popped up online. That was the, I can't remember what it was. Was it the Brine wife thing? Whatever? The blue ghosty girl? I'm sure there's somebody out there who's laughing at me for not remembering that. Yeah, so she's doing some filming for us for, I don't know, our credits or equivalent, which means after this stream, I've got to finish off the pictures that I was working on. I'm going to actually turn the ones that I've got into a little bit more pen and ink, sort of charcoal-y like looking images, or maybe just pencil style images. There we go. So she can have all the PCs from the game filmed in situ with maps and pins and various things. Lindsay has been hand drawing maps, which is lots of fun. So when I also found out that I was mostly blind, because I tried to teach her how to do mountains, which informed one of our decisions for some of the masterclasses we're doing actually, and found that I could barely see at all because I'm old. Hashtag old. Right, let's see if there's any other comments as I'm just working through here. Heron ads. Could we tie local mythology back to the weird Skaven fake seer? We could do that. What's your idea? I quite like the idea that he has become a local folklore. Maybe he's a mythical bogeyman to scare children like the Krampus. Now, we've not had a lot of time. So mythical folklore, the whole concept of myth tends to suggest age. So if you're doing that, you probably want to tie it into something that the Skaven is manipulating from a previous mythic creature. So it is using those myths and perhaps representing them in a new way and using those to allow it free passage through certain areas at night. That might work. I think there's definitely something in there possibly, but then we need to build up some really nice local myths for exactly what that could be. Okay, so we have the whole area sinking down. Yes, we do. Except seemingly the Temple of Sigmar. Do we want to explore why it is that, or perhaps a large chunk of weirdly green rock? No, I think this area around there is just firmed up still. The barge building's still in place. I think that's just firmer ground. The land is sinking that way. It's sinking this way, and it's sinking away. This is just slightly higher land, I think, and that for me is almost certainly going to do. I don't think we necessarily need to come up with anything particularly weird going on there. Although, given the timing of this, I think it is worth always reiterating that this map is from 2512. That means that we're in, assuming that you go with Games Workshop's timeline, the last decade or so before the world literally comes to an end. And that means that this is the worst of times. Pretty much everywhere is falling to corruption in one form or another. And that gives us lots of opportunities to look at locations like this and say, well, do we want this place to fall to some form of corruption? And if we do, how do we want to do that? So I'm not against that idea. So don't feel like I was rubbishing it when I was... there we go. Just cover that over there. When I was working over that one, I think it definitely could work. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave this loosely free as well so that our little manse there doesn't have too much encroaching on it. We can have what would originally been fences at the back, and it's sort of collapsed into a bogginess at the edges here. Then we move into the land at the side. I imagine that was once some nice free land beside the temple, and that's been sort of filled up. I want to make more space there between the buildings. I want to keep the roads nice and clear, even though in reality they're probably butting up against each other. We probably don't want that to be the case here. Okay. Yeah, okay. Let me just double check if there's anything else. Yalb says, so is there a good source where more of those local small guild gods are described or at least listed? Yes, there is. Tome of Salvation for 2nd edition. 4E Core has just a handful, you're correct. And there is no religion source book out there so far. Yes, there isn't. But the Tome of Salvation 2nd edition has got a shed load in it. Because, well, I added them. Tome of Salvation 2E, says Martin. Absolutely. That's the book you're probably looking for. Bloated Corpses, Rising from the Bogs, and a fledgling Nurgle cult. So we've already got ourselves a Nurgle cult working amongst, of all things, the upper classes that we're going to be adding to the rich quarter up in the north. So I am not keen to add another Nurgle cult unless we've got a reason for it forming here. And it doesn't conflict too much with the other Nurgle cult that we have. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't conflict. They might conflict and not like each other for various reasons, but it would need to be unique and interesting and have its own purpose for being there. I would also not be too keen on having a Nurgle cult that was, as I mentioned in a previous stream, just another filled with doctors who have collapsed or are studying diseases or whatever. If we're doing a Nurgle cult, why is it there? What's it doing? What sort of cool story can we build around it? Not against the idea, but we do have to make sure. I don't think this is that type of bog as well. Is that for our bloated corpses coming up? Yeah, I don't think so, because where would those corpses be coming from? In fact, you've pretty much read my mind, Yalla, but I agree. This used to be a forested part of land that as it got deforested and all the roots were taken away, and as the natural drainage channels were also removed and replaced with effectively stone, the water had nowhere to go, and it has just gathered in this area, and what looked like firm land a couple of decades or so ago has now turned into a boggy morass. So unless that we are looking at what was once an ancient war site, or perhaps going even further back, given that we are very much in old Unberrigan territory, there's absolutely nothing saying that we couldn't have some sort of ancient cairny, wraithy type thing in and around the area somewhere that got unearthed during the course of the expansion of the city, or perhaps is sitting underground. So there's potentially an undead thing you could drag in there, here, or elsewhere. But I think, again, if we're doing that, you need to have a really good story to make that work well. Right, so I'll carry on back on with this. This is sadly one of the more dully bits, just working our way across this area. Oh, we're almost there, actually. Once I've boxed out most of this area, I've got my houses in place, dropped a few chimney pots, made it quite messy. I'll check the comments one more time, just in case there's another really cool idea. Possibly add that cool idea, and then we'll go to doing all the colouring in, and we'll have all of this section hopefully done relatively swiftly. We're only sitting at just past 8 o'clock, and we'll hopefully get the entirety of this district done in relatively short order. I'm not saying it's going to be super fast, but it's going to be faster than other parts of the town have been. Let's get rid of that Rag and Bone Plaza nonsense. We know what that is. Also get rid of my excess lines here. So yeah, if anyone's got any ideas for anything that we could add as a minor cult into this area, take, for example, the Delb has got a god called Delb who lives at the bottom of the Delb, Lake Delb, in fact, up by Delbers, not Delbren, for those of you who are aware of those issues. we also have, say, for example, gods that are similar to, say, Beilerhof. Beilerhof is a god of the Beilerhof marshes over in Sylvania. And quite an interesting deity that's been used in a couple of different places, both in broader material and elsewhere. That god was very first intimated at, as I recall, inside Knight's Dark Masters when I added that to that. One of the great joys of doing the mapping for, I don't know, 3/4 of the second edition books was that I got all of the texts when they were completed sent to me. And sometimes there was mistakes or little bits and pieces. So I got an opportunity to go through and do a complete proofread of every single book. And in some cases do full development passes on them as well. Add extra details. If there's maps required, go to other Games Workshop books and make sure all the different locations that were mentioned in, say, Black Library novels or any equivalent were added. Because often most of the authors hadn't done all of the research, because seriously, how many people out there have got, say, 60, 70, 80 books, Black Library books, just hanging in their bookcase, all read and ready to go? And on top of that, all the White Dwarves, all the various editions of Warhammer, and exactly how they've been influenced by all their army books and the computer games. Not many folk do that. Very few people are idiotic like me and sort of compulsively collect them all. So I would go through and add all of the details that may have been forgotten or not been aware of by others. And Beilerhof was one of those many additions. It's also where I added Fort Steyerhof for the first time, a location that ended up being in the Undead Army list, as I recall. Well, the Vampire Counts Army list. They picked that one up from me and added that one in. Right, so we're almost there. We've got a few areas up here to add parts for. Yeah, I'm getting an idea for what this place is like. I'm really getting an idea that there's perhaps some really dodgy, horrible old person who sort of lords over this area. So possibly something like this is a special location with somebody who is almost the king of the bone pickers or the queen of the bone pickers. Someone who marshals folk to go and collect all of the city's detritus and then filter through it down here so that he or she can earn as much as possible from the waste from the rest of the city. I could see that working as a location. Let's just add a little road to that, but I've just added. I'll delete that out. Back onto there. Why is that not working? On the wrong line. There we go. So possibly we've got a nice location building there as well, which would be a good way of characterizing the entirety of Shit Heap Plaza, or whatever the heck we decide to call this place. Yeah, I can sort of see how this is working. Okay. Let's get this area, nice building in there, leading off towards sort of greeny grass. I think we're going to have sort of greeny grass around this area as well. Maybe a couple of old ruins down here, and then call that a day. This is a, yeah. Yeah, that works. Let's add in our wall again, connecting these. As I've mentioned multiple times, this wall does not need to be completely straight, not just because this place is almost certainly falling to subsidence, but because the very nature of the map is meant to look a bit more hand-drawn, a little bit more messy, which is super convenient for making it easy to draw. Ha ha ha. But it also makes it easy as a style for others to duplicate if you'd like to give something like this a go. Okay. A couple of ruins there. I think I'm almost done most of this area. Just double check I've got lines in most of the area. Yes, I do. This bit here is looking a bit blank, but once I put color on that, that'll be fine. Oh, this bit here too. Let's just do that. Yeah, okay. I think that's sort of looking all right. Cool. I'm going to bring up the comments to see where we are. Right. Where was our last comment? Did I say hello to you, Alan? I can't recall. If I didn't, hi. I'm pretty sure I did, though. Time back to Skaven. Yeah, I don't know if I did say it. I'm going to say hi again, just in case I didn't, Alan, because it's always good to see you in. Delighted to see you in. Heron says, time back to Skaven. If it was a wooded area, would there have been a local spirit of the woods? Now, this is much more down my line. The locals believe the fake seer is a twisted spirit raised by the destruction of its forest and it's seeking revenge. Now we're talking a little bit. Now, across the Empire, the deeper parts of the forest are not unlike any parts of the old world where you've got deep forests. There are forest spirits in the very deepest thickets, perhaps large forest spirits, your tree men and similar. But you're going to have your dryads, much like the rivers have also got some naiads in them. There's some relatively famous naiads, including, say, for example, the Loreley that's down by Loreley Rock that summons people down to their deaths. The river Blut that passes not too far from here as well is also notorious for its naiad and for spiriting people away and children coming out having been lost for, say, 20, 30 years, playing away with a little water spirit. If we go for the idea that this area was perhaps forested and we have a pretty fucking pissed off spirit, I definitely think that could be done. A dryad who is in fact fucking pissed or some equivalent. Yeah, that could be pretty cool. If anyone can think of an interesting way to build that into a story and exactly where she may be residing, she's probably sunk into a tree somewhere. What happens when this dryad interacts with these locals? Is it an angry spirit? Has it not been seen for a while? Is the Skaven, if we go with the Skaven, working on the superstitions of the local folk? Perhaps there is no spirit and it's something else. There's all sorts of stuff that we could potentially use there. So yeah, feel free to run with that one if you've got any other ideas. Executor adds, maybe in the really boggy bit, there is one very old large tree left. I'm liking this so far, that an Aeonir has been working hard to keep from being chopped down, perhaps because it's a dormant treeman. Well, we already have one Aeonir. In fact, I love that idea, Executor. I really love that idea because the Aeonir are going to be utterly fascinated by everything that Callaghan represents. In fact, they're not just going to be fascinated, they're also going to be slightly horrified. They are deeply political elves in the greater scheme of elvenkind. And what's going on in the Reichland and the mess that the Empire has become is so much of an issue for them that they've sent an entire delegation down to the Amber Hills, where several hundred elves are working to politically manipulate the Empire and bring it back, shall we say, to proper form, which is what you could sum it up as one gigantic buffer from the Elven Kingdoms, for when the worst comes, the Empire can help deal with that. But it's also in their best interest to ensure that the Empire is strong enough. And they've been manipulating Middenheim for a good 2,000 years plus, like almost 3,000 years. In my version of Warhammer, Middenball was actually introduced to Middenheim by the elves as part of the peacemaking processes that they had some 2,500 years ago or so. Now, we have at least one major Aeonir here who is currently slyly teaching the daughter of the local duke magic, because she's his only heir, and if she were submitted to the colleges, she would no longer be allowed to be heir. That would just be right out, because she's a witch and witches can't inherit. Witches have got their own titling system based around the whole magisterial system. It's also worth noting, though, that depending on your version of Warhammer, that's not the case. For example, when we first started writing 4th edition, we were fully allowed to use the magisterial system that had been in place since MVS did an awful lot of writing. That's Marianne von Stauffer. Marianne did an awful lot of writing around the colleges of magic. He wrote, for example, the Realms of Sorcery book for 2nd edition. He also wrote books like the Liber Chaotica, the Liber Necris, et al. Several articles about magic and exactly how it manifests. And during that era, so we're talking early noughties through to mid noughties, the whole reinforcement of what the colleges were and establishing them as a far more archaic, old world set of institutions was put in place. However, once we finished publishing the core book, it was determined that the Games Workshop wanted us to move away from that. So we were no longer using the word Magister in any of our books. And in one of the rewrites of the core book, the word Magister was removed from every single part of the core rulebook. However, by the time I left and then other hands came in, that idea had changed again, and Magisters were allowed to be used again with the most recent Magic book, the Winds of Magic there. So yeah, it's a complicated situation, particularly when you're dealing with someone else's IP, because different people will have different ideas for how that IP should express. And that includes people that work for the company itself. As different hands come in and take hold of that tiller, they'll have what they think the canon of Games Workshop work is. And when someone like me comes along and says, it's this is what all your work says, they often go, oh, right, great, someone's done the research, brilliant, and they just kind of tend to go with what I suggest. But when it's people who don't know the setting as well, they are much firmer in terms of how the IP is expressed. So cutting a long story short on that one, let's get back to where we actually are. The Aeonir are effectively getting an in with the local duke by teaching his daughter magic. This was originally came up as an idea in the stream where we were discussing a big statue that is in this part of town over, where are we? Over here. There's the statue right there in the center of the map. And it's not actually a statue. It is, I think it's a fisherman that she turned to stone. Not ideal. And he's effectively rendering her safe. Now, in my world, this is not that uncommon for noble bloodlines. They don't want to lose their nobility. And if they run out of legal heirs, their families come to an end. And that's as far as they're concerned, awful. But there is so much magic running through the empire just now that old families that used to be completely witch-free are suddenly popping out witches like nobody's business. And some of those are very famous in the colleges. Your Thyris Gormans, for example, or your Hans Feuerbach, if we just look at the Bright College. Hans Feuerbach from Talabheim Land. The Feuerbach family becomes super important over in Talabheim Land post The Enemy Within. And they are all removed from being, well, nobles. They're still noble-blooded, but they're no longer allowed to inherit. So lots of family bloodlines have taken, shall we say, slight sidelines, and that gives people like the Aeonir somewhere to get in. It also, sadly, gives a place for cultists to potentially provide an alternative to the current situation where the second you're a witch, you're off to the colleges of magic, or well, we are probably burnt, aren't you? So we've got someone who is a relatively prominent figure behind the scenes, not in front of the scenes. And perhaps having that figure, being aware of that would be a really nice little aside. Perhaps has gone down and communed with it. Perhaps has a deep concerns that its roots are being not just waterlogged, but corrupted by whatever lays down there. I think we could get a really nice story out of that. I think it's pretty awesome. You added which is slowly drowning because it's getting too boggy. Yeah, indeed. And we could even have, I mean, you could have an over-the-top storyline where the slow saturation of Ghyran in the local area, because our Ghyran, we've got, moving on, continuing on with the magic, there used to be an old waystone of the elves here, and it's beneath this part of the city here. And it's begun to slowly corrupt and stagnate because the waystone is blocked and broken. Meaning that all the magic that should be funneling through this area and then moving towards the Great Vortex in Ulthuan just isn't doing so properly. And there's been a great upswelling of Ghyran in this area, providing fecundity that didn't exist, and perhaps an over-fecundity as well. And as we all know, an over-fecundity tends to lapse into Nurgle overripeness and horribleness, or at least Dar, which can potentially also be a sideline. So with the slight tainting of the flows passing through here, perhaps that's a treeman that once was particularly active. When that stone was broken, the magic that was flooding through the area has left it with far less magic that it can draw upon, so it's fallen effectively asleep. And we could have ourselves some knock-on story plot lines that if A happens over here, then that means that suddenly the flow of Ghyran in the local area, that life magic that's going along on Old Dragonback, flies down through there, and it suddenly revivifies the treeman who comes to life. That can make an interesting story. We could have ourselves people who want it to possibly be chopped down for just simple reasons that it's in the way. The elf trying to stop that from happening, or perhaps other figures trying to do that too. There's all sorts of story hoops we can get with that one. In short, I love it. Let's stick with that. So, moving down to Yalab, I will digress slightly. After running a one-shot, which ended up splitting into 2 evenings, as these things tend to do, the group decided they like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Amazing GM. That's very nice to hear, Yalab. So I'll be running a game starting quite soon. Yay! I've decided to plop it over in Ourswold for starters. Ourswold's a lovely place, hence the request for a map of that area. I may end up giving my non-existent artistic skill a stretch and try to map the town. Oh, Yalab, that'd be awesome. I'll be very interested to see how it goes, and I'll give you help if we can. We can bring it up in the stream, even if you fancy doing so. Devin adds, is there already some sort of local god for Hallskrug Mountain? There isn't. I'll bring up the local map, so if anyone's got an idea for how that might manifest, you can do so. The local mountains are actually named for the Hallskrugs, as I recall. It's the Herzogschwart, I believe. Herzogschwart, sitting up here. And the Hallskrugs are an old family. They've been here for at least 2,000 years, and they've been ruling here for 2,000 years as dukes, possibly for almost since the time of Sigmar, perhaps a little bit after that. They don't have a county, they have a duchy, as is often the case for some of the older family lines in the Reichland. And I am definitely up for having some sort of local deity up in the mountains, perhaps even a patron of the Hallskrugs. The Hallskrugs' coat of arms is a big swan, a crown swan. There's a variety of names for that type of swan if you want to go looking for those. Bone swan. So that could be tied to it. We could have some sort of swan, birdie, avian type deity, or perhaps we could have ourselves something a little bit darker and up there. It's not a god, it's something that has been worshipped as a god, but perhaps is an old trapped demon or some sort of minor chaos god or some equivalent. You could do that too. That could get yourself off in a side quest for going and purging or freeing the god from its Arianka-like tomb, which in fact is nothing more than freeing an old demon from its old place, and the sort of demon that's very talkative and likes to talk to PCs in a horrible way. There's all sorts of fun things that we could potentially do with that, and I'm well up for that. And if we do that, I'll just add a location up there that may be needed to support that. But if anyone can think of a good story for that, do feel free to go wild. I love these sort of things. And on that, I do think it's worth me adding a couple of small asides on that. Although I haven't been engaging much with the Discord of late, I'm about to do so because we're getting closer and closer to us starting our stream. And I've been doing an awful lot of work behind the scenes, both for stuff for the Rookery, which takes up pretty much all my day job. And then in the evenings, I've been diving into doing some fun aside things for us for the Lawhammer game. But I'm about to go diving into all of the locations and dropping in ideas. If you'd like to help write up any of the locations, we've got ourselves a whole Discord server worth of cool places that you can just go, hey, I'd quite like to write this, and just slam in cool ideas. Martin, bless his soul, presuming that he's still on the stream somewhere, has marked out every single location we've drawn so far and opened a thread up for that over in the Callaghan channel inside our Discord channel. So it's worth popping over there and just adding your ideas to any one of those. And that includes if you go back to any of the older streams and you hear about one of the locations, you're like, that sounds great. In fact, so great, I wouldn't mind giving a go writing that up. If you'd like to do so, then feel free to go give it a go, and we'll pick up those ideas and we'll pop them over into World Anvil. That's the next one. World Anvil, we've got ourselves... Oh, I meant to add someone to World Anvil and didn't do it the other day. I'll do that after the stream. If you're out there anywhere, Desmond, I'll get you on. That'll be Alexander, I presume. We'll get you on to World Anvil after this. If you'd like to help us do actual proper write-outs over on World Anvil, equally, do get in contact with me over in Discord and we can help out. World Anvil is a gigantic database of all your cool stuff for your world. We've got a Lawhammer World Anvil building there, and I'm going to be dropping in articles for pretty much everything my PCs pass by as we work our way through the game, or at the very least allowing an opportunity and a space for other people to do it if they want to write up about the game or anything that they've seen us do. Our version of what Warhammer is going to be pretty interesting. Speaking about Aeonir, we have an Aeonir in our party, and I'm really quite pleased with where she's going. So yes, local god, damn good idea. Also, while I'm here before I move to the next comment, if you haven't done so already, do please like the stream. Do please share it to anyone you think might be interested in watching me blabber on about stuff, or perhaps just interested in helping build one of the diplomatic centers for not just the Reichland, but the empire as a whole. Leitman Halskrug is the High Lord ambassador for the Reichland, making him one of the most important figures, not just in the Reichland, but in the empire as a whole. He runs the Reichland spy network. He runs the Black Chamber in Altdorf, which is the center of all spies as well. So a significant amount of the empire's mail passes through Altdorf, and a lot of that is intercepted by he and his various code breakers and spies that he's working with. Halskrug is also someone who meets with all of the ambassadors, all of the visiting diplomats, and many of them come down here. If you've got anyone that you think might be interested in helping build that with us, do send them down here. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do so, because that would be awesome. Right, I'll get over the last few comments here, and then I'm going to color this all in. Heron, did I cover everything Devin said? Yes, I did. Heron says there could be a local cult of those that remember the old spirit and are seeking to mollify and appease it. In reality, they are unwitting tools of the fake seer. That would be too Skaven in exactly the same place. I would probably want to move that, possibly, if we're doing that, possibly just outside. So that Skaven is possibly manipulating folk from the outside, maybe with some old loggers who are used to leaving out totems and ensuring that certain trees aren't cut down because they want to appease the local spirit rather than offend it. We could also potentially have that connected through to the Hedgewise that we have all the way up there, one of the cunning folk. Cunning folk are, in many respects, responsible for dealing with local spirits and ensuring that they are not annoyed. And if we've got a tree man potentially sitting down here, we possibly have a dryad that's active sitting on the outside, maybe doing a murder or two of folks who really should know better. The hedge witch is almost certainly someone who would be interested in interacting with that as well, and almost certainly would spot those signs and potentially move into conflict with the wood elves who might be trying to awaken it, or the hedge witch might be trying to do the opposite and attempting to send it to sleep so that it doesn't harm any of the local community. So I think, yeah, there's quite a lot of cool, good stuff we could do with that. Oxcuter adds, Andy is old world equivalent of the Black Library. Sure. Yeah, I do have a lot of books. Let's put it that way. Heron says maybe the real spirit dies as in fact returned, leading to some awkwardness all around. And I think conflict is generally always better. I remember having a discussion freaking years ago with who was it? Was it Steve Saville who wrote the Vampire books? No, it wasn't. It was someone else. It was about 2002. It was someone who was writing one of the novels. And they were discussing what they were going to do with one of their characters with me over in the Black Library forums. Because I was a moderator over there back in 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, back when there was still forums with Black Library. And we were discussing out one of their characters. And I offered a quick, well, if you kill them, you can't use them again. The old line. There's nothing wrong with having a Reichenbach Falls and having a character you can bring up. As we all know, one of the biggest problems with the Marvel movies is they don't really have any decent bad guys because they keep on killing them. Meaning that each movie comes along, a hero goes, I'm a hero. Look, there's a bad version of me, dead. There's another bad version of me, dead. As they are wiped out from movie to movie, leaving us with very few interesting bad guys. And generally speaking, as a story builder, when I'm, say, for example, building an adventure or working through my roleplay groups, I'm always loath to kill someone unless it's got a good impact for the story. And if we're building ourselves a cool spirit out here, why would we have it dead if we could have it alive? Particularly then, because then it's the PCs who could potentially be responsible for either A, killing it, really pissing off the Eoneer, which would be fun, and potentially pissing off the Hedgewise as well, even though the Eoneer and Hedgewise may have two very different routes towards trying to placate or control or otherwise cause this spirit to calm down. That doesn't mean that they in any way want to see it killed. So yeah, that could be quite a fun thing. So I'm quite cool with our woodland spirit, our dryad out there being very much alive, and potentially the Skaven that was using the local superstition is also now in conflict with it, and perhaps that it didn't expect to, assuming that we do stick with that being a Skaven and not something else. And then adds, maybe the real spirit does return, leading to awkwardness. All right, I think I just said that, and yes, I agree. The Dunny-Trix, mistress of the heap. we do have a pretty big heap over here that's going to need someone over that. The Dunny-Trix. It's a little bit too classical in terms of how it's approached as a name. I kind of like it though. That could be quite fun for the character that's potentially working from there. Yeah, but adds also, I gave the small deities list to look over, and while I don't have any particular suggestions for this area, it seems that Borkbach, I haven't thought of Borkbach for ages, as a deity is certainly could have a presence somewhere in the day. Yeah, Borkbach is cool. I think I might have even created Borkbach back in the day. Or did I take that out of one of the novels? No, not the novels, because the novels are really only concerned with like Sigmar. Oh, Mor exists. Sigmar. Oh, Ulrich exists. Sigmar. Oh, Verena exists. They tend to focus very tightly on Sigmar. Age of Sigmar was no surprise as an outcome from the way many people view Warhammer World. Yeah, Borkbach is a damn fine idea. I agree. That'd be quite fun. Alan adds, could there be a small group of fine diners? We do like a fine diner. Epicureans are always fun, and we also have an Epicurean that tours around the Reichland that was mentioned in where did we mention that one? It was B and I that built that one, so that means it's going to be in the Adventure Hooks thing. That was the thing is the Reichland. I can't remember what we called that one in the end. Not off the top of my head anyway. But we do have an Epicurean that's wandering around, and we could possibly tie that in, allowing the existing Adventure Hooks to seed into Callaghan. They've exhausted the normal menu choices, don't they always? We also have Ubersreich has got a similar thing where there's a chef who's looking to cook exotic meats, and that causes a bit of an issue because we use that chef to tie into, and I won't give any spoilers, but to tie into If Looks Could Kill. And one of the potential outcomes for If Looks Could Kill and the creature or the things or the whatevers that are in that tie directly to that flesh and have that flesh, pardon me, that says something to that cook and has a potentially awful outcome, which is lots of fun. And are now feeding off the corpses of the recently dead. Oh, we've gone dark. Maybe someone going around and finding live delicacies. Okay, that's properly horrible, Alan. I like it. Cannibalism is always it's always a classic. It always works quite well for the noble classes because it's the idea of them quite literally eating those who are beneath them. It also works for the flip as well, eat the rich. But it works really well as a symbol of over-the-top debauchery to a degree. I do quite like the idea of that. And if we can wend that in some way, I think it would work well. That would work well for a Slaanesh cult, but I think it's almost obvious as a Slaanesh cult. You could twitch it, spin it slightly into a corn cult if you wanted to turn it into a cult where they are eating the meats raw. They want it bloody, and they are looking to bring the meat in live and to kill the meat on sight and rather upper-classly eat it. We are dealing with a city that has potentially a preponderance of upper class. We haven't reached that part of the mapping yet, but we are going to reach them. There's going to be embassies. There's going to be rich mansions. There's going to be several noble families that have sent scions or important second, third, fourth members of their bloodlines to come here to try and influence the politics that are burgeoning. And more importantly, right back home, should there be anything of interest for the larger household. So yeah, I'm not against this. I think there's potentially some fine stories in there. You just need to expand upon it to make it into something really super cool. Yellowbads, Ian are having a specific interest to have presence in the city, in addition to more vague and general political reasons, works quite well for the Ares tie that we have about established. Yes, I absolutely agree. And that gives us an excellent link between the northernmost and southernmost parts of Callaghan. Perfect way for the PCs to go all the way across. I agree again. It's something I've discussed in previous streams. One of our jobs, since we are collectively creating this, is to try and ensure that the city that we build is dynamic for PCs. Now, if we're building, say, 2 adventure hooks for each one of our locations, having those adventure hooks link directly through to other parts of the city. So, for example, I'm up in the north and I am speaking to the Aeonir, and the Aeonir gives me a job who sends me down into the south of the city. You arrive in the south of the city where the tree man thing is the primary job. And the person who's trying to stop that gets in contact with you and then can provide you with an adventure hook there that sends you over to the west of the city. And having the adventure hooks linked through to each other so that effectively by just using the material as it's presented, you almost form a campaign inside the city. Totally worth it. So one of our jobs will be bouncing people around the city by clever use of adventure hooks. We did that to a degree with the Ubersreich book. Where we tried to make sure that there was some interesting links between different parts. But because at that point there was a very strong idea to add 2 other types of expansion on top, which was the Adventures of Ubersreich, which were meant to be, loosely speaking, one gigantic campaign, didn't end up as that in the end. And as a second set, there was going to be Ubersreich Almanacs. I think there's only one tracery of that left. The Ubersreich Almanacs got name dropped, I think, in Enemy and Shadows. I think it's still in there, where it's in one of the rumors sections. I think only one of the almanacs that I commissioned came close to print, and that was the one discussing what was happening over in Newfall Young Castle with the Jungfreuds. That was going to be one of the almanacs. We had another one planned, I think maybe even written for the Schaffenbergs, and another one for the Bruners. And each of the noble families were going to have a good examination of their lands and everything that was held within it. And that was going to be, again, using adventure hooks to move you into Ubersreich and then back out into their lands, then back into Ubersreich, effectively turning that into one gigantic campaign area. But we can do something similar with what we do here. Yalabads, the idea came up separately from the statue, just got quickly tied to it. Yes, it did. And yeah, I love it. Also, there is a reference to Magisters and 4E Core in the intro letter. Yes, I wrote that back when it was allowed to be Magister. That's Magister Alana Grunfeld, Magister Alana, not Grunfeld, Magister Alana Grauman. Alana Grauman is an NPC in my campaign, actually. She's an interesting character. Alana Grauman has been met by my party already, and they already have opinions on what Grey Wizards are because of that. And one of the players has already written a letter to her, which will probably be popping up somewhere, whether that's over on the Patreon as a blog post or whatever. Yalabads, how about, since the treatment is presumably the largest tree in the area, perhaps it being used as a hanging post for local criminals? Yeah, we could put it just down here. Yeah, I quite like that. That's a good idea, Yellow. Good call. In fact, let's not forget that. Oh, whoa. Wrong layer. While I'm doing that, I'll quickly tidy that up so it's not over the walls while I'm at it. Okay, so let's do that and go Hangman Tree Man. So I'm thinking about there. I'm quite close to Templars Sigmar, and relatively firm land. Possibly one of the reasons why the Templars Sigmar is also a firmer land, because of the deep roots of the treeman there. And let's not do one of these crappy little Warhammer treeman that you get in the war game. Let's go for proper, I'm a big fuck off old tree man. So proper tree size. So you're looking, whoa, really big. So let's make that a big tree with roots that have sunk into the entire area. It's begun to slide down slightly towards the south of the city. I think that works quite well. Martin then adds, looking at the castle, would it be worthwhile to have the gatehouse as a purple location? Let's just have a quick look over at that castle. No, I'm quite happy with it not being, because we have a lot of established locations there. But we could do that when we go up and we do the muster grounds. How about, if you remember to tell us, when we get up to drawing all of the areas around that muster ground, let's have a look at what we put bordering there. If we add maybe an extra barracks or two, or if we add any municipal buildings in that area. Municipal building seems quite likely, perhaps a big town hall like a borough's office or something for the Burgermeisters. If we don't have many purple areas there, I think definitely doing that would make sense. But we hadn't already established anything strong for it. We had established lots of stories for the bit beside it, and they were going to be largely tied to the Tower of Wizards, and other places. But yeah, I'm not 100% convinced, but not against it. Yalabad's probably not. Oh, he's got an opinion. There wasn't anything special about the gatehouse. That's true, there wasn't, but it doesn't mean we couldn't add something. Esty says, would the watch have a presence in this part of the town, or are we thinking that locals deal with criminals and criminals on their own? Right, so Esty, we've discussed this in previous stream, but I will go a little bit into depth here to make sure it's 100% clear. There are no city watch, not as we understand it in a modern sense. There are no policemen. All there is the state army. And the state army are up here doing their thing. Now, do they patrol the streets? Not really. They keep the emperor's peace. People are expected to keep their own peace, and if they don't, they get dragged to a magistrate by their peers. Law enforcement is handled by locals. It's not handled by anything but locals. That's why things like thief takers exist. That's why investigators exist, because there is no proper police force. It's not like Altdorf, which has a proper established watch. Outside of the big cities, there isn't really a watch. I mean, there's people who may act as watchmen. Take, for example, Griswold. Griswold has got a detachment that's attached to one of the state regiments there called the Fifers. And the Fifers are effectively permanent watchmen. They're soldiers that are given over to just patrolling the town and keeping the emperor's peace. That's not investigating crime. That's not solving crime. That's just making sure that people are not disturbing other people, which often involves pulling out clubs, beating them, making them cool off somewhere or some equivalent, definitely dragging them off elsewhere. So I don't think there will be anything even close to a watch down here. There's no need for one. I mean, why would the state army have any interest down here other than, for example, a riot or something else going down? Do they particularly care that there's crime down here? No, it's not their job. Their job is to keep the emperor's peace. So they've got a slightly different thing, a different remit, so to speak. So I'm quite happy with that not being the case. Also quite happy for someone to come up with a cool idea that there may be, for example, a host of racketeers locally who are effectively keeping the peace in return for coin. Martin says, I had a thought of ships figureheads on the docks waiting for use, sprouting into growth, resulting in a large tree that looks as if it had someone trapped within it. So we're a wee bit away from the ship's figurehead zone, so I'm not quite sure what you're asking for there. If you're looking at the barge building, that's quite a different idea. I mean, they will still have, some of them might have something close to a tiny figurehead, but I can't see it being anything particularly large, unless I've got something mixed up there from what you're suggesting. Yab says this is the barge building zone, but it's mirroring loosely what I said. Probably not many figureheads around, again, mirroring what I said. Martin then says, no, it was a thought from a few weeks ago with the docks opposite the shipyard, but Andy just moved on from that area and I couldn't type quickly enough. Yeah, plus the comments come in a little bit slow. I apologize for moving so quickly. Yal then says, and you were watching previous streams again. Well, they have to be done. Executor adds, Adventures to Foot in the Reichland. Yes, that was it. That's what I called it. Thank you very much for clarifying that, Executor. And yes, there is an Epicurean adventure hook in there, as I recall. I can't remember what we named him. That's really disappointing. I'm sure it will come back to me at some point. Just as a small aside, Adventures to Foot in the Reichland was originally going to be inside the core book, but we didn't have enough space, where we were going to add adventure hooks throughout the course of the chapter about the Reichland. The Reichland chapter has got a couple of pretty poor adventure hooks in there, like Orphan White and similar inside the core book. There's not very much in there, but they were originally going to go in, but the core material for the Reichland was considered to be more important than all of the adventure hooky bits. So we decided to add that as a freebie PDF on top. And I think that worked quite well. The original version of it actually had 2 adventure hooks, maybe even 3, for every single location that was mentioned in the core book. But when they came in, a bunch of them just weren't up to scratch. So I siphoned that down to the best of the ones that we had available, and then developed them a little bit further to try and add a little bit of extra vim and vigor to what some of the adventure hooks offered, to try and make sure at least they were playable and interesting. Right, let's go and zoom through the rest of our comments. It's such a good release. I'm glad you like that, Yella, but we had a lot of fun putting that one together. It was largely B and I that did that one. Boxing be a good place to lose evidence, says Alan. I agree, and that possibly should be tied into possibly a local investigator. It might be worth figuring out where we're going to drop an investigator, probably in a more salubrious part of town. But a lot of the thief takers are basically criminals. What they do is their mates steal something, and the thief taker comes in and says, "Oh, I'll get that sorted for you. Let me liaise with the thieves on your behalf. Okay, let's see what they want." And they go to the thieves, and the thieves are their mates, and they're like, "Right, okay, I've approached them, and they're willing to pay, say, 6 pfennigs to get their stuff back." They go over, get the 6 pfennigs, and the thief taker basically just acts as a liaison. It's like minor scale racketeering, but with just burglars and thieves. And that was common in the real world, back before there was police, back before we had an established policing group. It was just a free-for-all in many respects. If somebody broke the law, it was your responsibility to basically drag them up before a magistrate and then get a judgment. And then you would bring your evidence and claim why they were a criminal, and the magistrate would then make a judgment. And that's something that's very much the case in the Empire. It's a bit more of a, well, free-for-all. Reno would like it to be different, but currently it isn't. Oscar says, "I love that there is a hidden message in the intro letter in the core book." I'm delighted that you like that. As I mentioned in one of the previous streams, I was so close to making it more complicated, but I didn't in the end, purely because to do so would have meant that it wouldn't have been found. Alana Grauman, pardon me, was going to be used in part 3 of The Enemy Within, as I recall. And I was going to do a more complicated code in there that potentially would have used some tests to try and break through as a piece of secretive information that would eventually have led to some of the core material that that didn't really come to pass in, if I think about Empire in Ruins and where it actually sits. But yeah, it was going to provide some of the extra potential lore for setting up some of the things in Empire in Ruins to ensure that Empire in Ruins was a natural development of what came before. And she was going to be there. And it's one of the reasons why we used Alana Grauman inside the core book to do effectively introduce the Empire letter, because that's what it is. It's a quick breakdown of what the Empire is like. Because we knew a lot of PCs who perhaps didn't know the Empire very well would almost certainly use that letter as a quick way of grounding themselves into the setting, which means they'd be introduced to that character, which meant when we brought that character in, it would seem like a natural and organic part of the process of playing with Warhammer, and they get a little squee of, "Wait a minute, I know this one," which is always fun. Yeah, Baz, the Ubersreich Adventures 1 and 2 can sort of be run as a campaign. Yep. And they even have some suggestions how to tie them together and link to Ubersreich of the starter set. Yeah, and that's how it should be. They were originally... the problem is with the current set of adventure is they're missing like 5 of them that were originally commissioned, and they're the proper link adventures that led one into the other. I've mentioned some of these in the previous streams. Like, for example, there's an adventure called One of Our Luminarchs is Missing. I mentioned that one. And that was a link directly through to Heart of Glass. One of Our Luminarchs of Missing is where the lenses that were used in Heart of Glass came from, the great Luminarch from the Light College. And it was stolen for a variety of reasons. And it was a bit of a romp through Ubersreich, taking you through many of the key locations in Ubersreich so that your characters could be introduced to all of those. But sadly, I left before that adventure came to pass. I'm really upset about that one because I quite liked it. The guide to Duchy of Blackrock helps with that quite a bit. I really need to read what they eventually landed on. I had tons of conversations about everything it should include. I'm hoping it's got a good chunk about the Trott family in there. The Trotts were mentioned in a few places, including in Empire, Enemy in Shadows, pardon me, where one of the rumors, as I recall, explains that the Trott family had recently made a very strong alliance with House Jungfreud. That was massively worrying because the Trotts hold one of the largest mercenary forces, not just in the Reichland, but the Empire. And that is very worrying for those of you who are concerned about civil issues. Martin, I missed Heron there. Pardon me. Oh, sorry about that, Heron. Could the Flying Danners be tied to Cain? Perhaps there could be a bit of a variation from the Cone Celestials. Yeah, yes, they could. Although if it's Cain in particular, you would be looking for. I mean, this is going to be if we ran with this Epicurean angle, there would be a relatively urbane set of murderers. He's a god of, depending on how you look at it, assassination, death, murder, an illegal god at that. We would need to ensure that there was a good reason for why that cult exists, how it would work with the main body of the cult that's elsewhere. You've got to remember that, say, for example, in the South, the cult of Cain is not illegal. It is an established cult, and it has a host of established cult practices, meaning that it's not quite as weird and bloody and chaos-like as some people tend to use it, particularly when you go into the south of the empire. And if we're dealing with a diplomatic center, it's quite possible there are some people who are very closely tied to Cain inside the city, foreigners, for example, and they would be looking to have their religious, let's say, beliefs expressed in some fashion. So yeah, we could definitely tie that in. Again, a good story would sort that out. Martin says the gatehouse would be the first point of contact for PCs. Correct. A potential barrier guards to be bypassed, and it leads into the Whistling Pass and Nurglish symbolism. It does, but given that we're going to have ourselves a section which basically describes the district, in many respects, that will be covered by the very description of this district as the fort. You arrive at the gatehouse, you see its big walls, you see the winding roads making their way up past a host of towers, bristling with weapons, leading to the castle and the barracks that are further up. Sheep and cows sitting out on the open farmlandy bits that are up there, because in the end, this is hopefully, as far as they're concerned, an entirely self-sufficient area. So we would have an area and a place to discuss all of that. The question would be, what would be the point of making it a location? You would need to have a very strong NPC that wasn't just, I'm the NPC who lives here. You need to have strong adventure hooks, not just the, I arrive at the castle, because in many respects, the castle itself will deal with that. We're looking for something that makes it stand out as a location. As I say, though, not against it, just got to make sure it's worth doing. They talk about the Treeman triggered a memory, possibly a red herring from the Treeman thread. Again, comment lag. Yalb says, honestly, basically all the PDF only releases are solid. Building, one-shots, patrons, monuments, etc. I agree. All quite good content, especially if, on the go for a few years. And that was the whole point of them. I had, well, here's a small thing. We announced this, actually, but it didn't happen because of things. But every single career was going to be getting one. I had 64 PDFs lined up for every single career. And it was basically going to do what loosely I'm doing already, which was take a career, add a bunch of sub-careers to it, and then explain how that career can be used in game. Add a bunch of cool, funky things for a player in that career to have, meaning that whatever career you had, you could just go buy yourself a nice wee side PDF. They would have probably only been about 6-7 pages each. So super simple, fast stuff. And then at the end of that, we could have just bundled that together, all 64 of them into a book. And we'd have got ourselves a pretty goddamn huge book of awesomeness for each one of the careers that were inside. The soldier career, for example, would have probably had about 8 or 9 threads built into it. But instead, the current version of, after I left, of Warhammer has decided to just create new careers instead. So add on, say, an archer career or a different form of soldier career, rather than just using the soldier career and expanding it. They're instead just adding new careers, which wasn't the original plan, but so be it. That's just the way it goes, isn't it? Future then adds, there is Ubersreich. Yes, there is. There's with the campaign coming fairly soon. We're interested to see what that does, because I think that'll be the first one that isn't the stuff I organized. I'm not sure what's in it, so that might not be the case. It might still have stuff. I organized an awful lot of material before I left, which was getting released. I mean, still getting released in some cases. That's a thing. Right, so I've done enough talk. Let's bloody paint this out. We managed to talk there for far too long. I was hoping to have all my colors and shades in place by now. So let's get it all done now. First, our location color. That's our purple areas. These are for our special locations that we will hopefully be all writing up. Let's drop those in. I'm going to use just this one building here as a representative for the entire square. We're going to add the Stonemasons Guild up here as a special location. A place that's fallen in dark times, possibly a guild master who is geriatric and useless, possibly a put upon younger man who's acting kinda as the guild master. We also have ourselves our sculptor type down here. Decide exactly what to do with that in the writing. We have over here our windmill setting a funny angle. There we go. Do we have any other locations that we need to mark in here? I don't think we do. If there's anything you think I've missed, do bring it up into the comments. I'm now going to just move on to the buildings and start filling out those. I'll do all the color first. Once I've done all the color, I'll come into the comments, resolve those, and then I'll do all the highlights and shading and any extra drawing that is required from the comments, just in case someone's come up with a cool idea that makes me redraw a section of it. And then we'll be pretty much done. This section. And the question is, do I want to then move into the boggy part, or will we call it a night at that point? Let's see where we get to. It's often easier working in blocks rather than breaking halfway through a block, though. So if I was starting again, that might add an extra couple of hours to the stream. And given that I want to do a bunch of sketches for Erin for tomorrow, I might not do that and then just pop offline and do a bunch of sketches for Erin. Those sketches almost certainly will pop up on the Patreon blog when we go live as well, so you get a good look at what we've done for those. Yeah, okay. Putting on the building starts to shape up the areas and what it looks like. If you're sitting on and worrying what's next, if you're coming up with ideas for other areas, feel free to drop them in as comments. We still don't have necessarily a religious thing in this area other than the cult of Sigmar. And I still think it would be nice if we did. I still don't know what that should be. I still think it would be nice if it was there, though. It's always good to try and reinforce that polytheism of the Empire and try to remember that it's not just all about Sigmar, Mor, Tal and Raya, Renald. There are not just hundreds, but there are thousands of gods in the Empire. And on top of that, they all have their own holy, blessed servants, saints as well. Divine servants, which, if you were being uncharitable, you could say are demons of these particular gods from the divine realms. How they manifest within your game is entirely up to yourself. Some people just don't even think about it. Others have got that cacaw of ravens being heard whenever anything to do with Mor is going down. We all deal with the religious side in different ways. I know some people who believe that there are no gods and that it's all chaos. I know other people who believe that there's billions of gods. Others that suggest that the chaos gods are entirely trapped inside the realms of chaos and capable of directly impacting the world, where the other gods could impact the world but choose not to. That's something that was reinforced, for example, in the Tome of Salvation, where Tal issued a diktat, or if you go for the Elven Pantheon, it was Azurin who issued a divine diktat saying that the gods could no longer directly influence the mortal realms after what happened with the Great War in the Heavens, as the gods almost destroyed the world with their Great War caused by the rebellion of the Chaos Gods. That's also marked in the Tome of Salvation. There's a nice little aside about that. That was in chapter 1, as I recall. One of the box pieces aside, which, a couple of stories in that one. One of them, Wolfie Whiteback, that got massively simplified. There was originally quite a poem about Wolfie Whiteback, an Ulrican discussion by, it's the High Capitular, as I recall, was writing. That was Sigmar. Bernistoltz? Pretty sure it's him. And that got simplified massively. That used to be a far bigger piece. I think that's where we also added the piece about, effectively, Cain and Shalia having a bit of a thing, which is interesting if you consider that Cain is either Mor's brother or his twin, depending on which particular myth you prefer to go with. But that section's actually got a mistake. There's a poem right at the beginning about Tal and Raya, and they were meant to be justified left and right on the page, but instead they all run together and don't make a great deal of sense. That was just a small mess of layout. That was Hal. He didn't realize how it should be marked. Hal Mangold, who is, if you don't know Hal, an absolute god. He's Green Ronin's layout chap and has done an enormous amount of good in all of the bajillions of books that he's worked on. Let's get our thing in place. Right, we're definitely getting there. As I sit here mapping, I'm trying to remember what's possibly going into the Uber's Reich 3. Is that the one that's just reprints of older stuff? And it's got an adventure I didn't use in it, the one in Geistbach. It could be that. I actually repurposed that. Dave offered that one. That was Dave Allen who did the original treatment on it. And we were going to update that one significantly and add extra material to support Drachenfels in the area. But I decided instead to go with the existing Ubersreich material that we're building in an Ubersreich campaign, which was quite different in tone to those pieces. Excellent. Okay, right, we've got our core bits in place. I'm going to check the comments, and then when I've done that, I'm going to go back and finish off the colouring, highlights and shades, and then we're done this section. So let's pull that back and go look at the comments. Well, there's not very many. Excellent. Now, says, I don't think the plan for the PDFs was released, and neither do I, because the community would not shut up about it for a second. Yeah. I don't know what the community has or hasn't said about such things, but I do know for a fact that I was quite disappointed not to put those in place. I'd written 4 of them, I think, by the point that that particular plan got shelved. Very disappointing. Alan Adds, listening on my phone, watching on my laptop at a swimming pool. What could possibly go wrong? Sploosh! No idea. Yalabads, the UEA3 release notes mention a look at Ubersreich in the aftermath of the enemies within. Interesting. 3 adventures getting revamped. Eye for an Eye. Eye for an Eye is a pretty good adventure. That'd be good, although its timing is really about 2519 of you using it. So it'll be interesting to see how they do that. Horror of Hugeldal, yeah, it's a solid adventure. Although, again, the Horror of Hugeldal is like 2522, 2521. Somewhere around there in terms of its I wonder if they'll change the content, because if you're going to properly support what happens in Ubersreich and eventually Vermintide and what occurs in Ubersreich far later, you'd want to make sure that you did that right, but they might not. Mirror Desire, that's much less impactful. You could add that one with ease. And ways to combine them into a campaign together with new hooks and adventures. That's a pretty easy rejig of some 3E material. I didn't do that. I purposely didn't do that when we were putting it together, because that material was so grounded in the time that it was from that I actually quite liked it being future adventures you could use at a later date. So if you played in Ubersreich and you carried on with your campaign, you could grab yourself the old 3 adventures and then move on to that. It was one of the reasons I was rather disappointed that Rough Nights and Hard Days ended with Lords of Ubersreich, because I much preferred the original version of that adventure inside the 3E version. That adventure, though, was already put in place when I came on as the producer. So I wasn't in a position where I could say, yeah, nix that, let's rewrite something else for the conclusion for this weird little campaign that's making its way around Reichland. I probably would have. And having said that, though, I ended up adding 2 extra adventures to that. So we ended up having 5 instead of the initial 3. Because originally it was going to be 3 and it just wasn't good enough. It needed more. So Graham and I put that together, and that was an interesting book. But I think I would have preferred to have a bigger Ubersreich section to conclude that. But not that, because it really undermined what was happening in Ubersreich with Lady Nacht, the Imperial Herald, with the Jungfreuds, with the war that was almost certainly brewing. But having said that, though, the version of what happens in Empire and Ruins is nothing in comparison to what I would have expected. So they might have it far easier to wrap that up with a tiny little blow. But if you do watch our streams, when we get to those particular sections, this is not something that you could easily drop those adventures into. Ubersreich is many years away from becoming a free town. Right, anyway, what's next? On the next one, was that the next one? I keep thinking what god could be interesting to place here, especially something unexpected, but I'm not coming with any solid. No, neither am I, but we can always come back to it later. I hope the new content features Uber's Right 5 for Vermintide. See, the Uber's Right 5 were actually meant to be mentioned in 3 separate places in the Enemy Within campaign. And I wrote one of the sections, so I'm a bit disappointed that's not there. The first time they will be mentioned is in... where did I bring them in first? That would have been... Midnight. Yeah, it was the Power Behind the Throne. Yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah, so they were meant to be mentioned there. I'm not sure how much of our sections for the Uber's Reich material. I love Fat Sharks. They're the nicest people. So I wanted to keep on supporting them with the future releases. So I spoke with Graham, and Graham was also super excited to add in a couple of Uber's Reich 5 mentions, because people love that sort of Easter eggs. The cross-media thing makes it fun. And if it makes sense and it works, why not do it? You don't want it to sound a little bit like here's a who's who of the empire. Oh, such and such is here today. Yay! You want it to feel like it's a natural part of you arrive at an area. These are the people in the area. These are the things that go. Like, for example, having Franz Lohner down in the Red Moon Tavern in the Uber's Right material. That made sense. And he's a tie back all the way back to the original Shadow of the Hondrat and Dark Omen computer games, and obviously through to Vermintide as well. So those little references are something we were very keen to try and ensure were kept in place. Yeah, then adds, it's probably a bit too early for that. That's like Uber's Right Adventures 13 material. Yeah, for where it's going. Yeah, I totally agree. But the Uber's Right 5, it's not too early for them. Particularly at least 2 or 3 of them. Yeah, and one of them is almost certain to be in my game at some point. I know exactly what I'm doing with that one. Maybe 2 of them, and I might even use the original material that I was going to do for the later parts. But there's a slight problem with that, and that's that I intend to really move very quickly through the first 3 books of the Enemy Within when we present it as a stream campaign, because I have no interest in dwelling on material that people know really, really well. The latter part is the way I'm presenting. It's going to be massively different to how they are in the books. So that's where I really want to focus our energy, so that can be fresh and exciting and new. There's going to be a lot of fresh and exciting and new in the world that we present through the course of the first 3 books anyway. But I intend within like 2 or 3 months to be done, rinsed with like half of the campaign, leaving me with just about a year to do, well, if I go really fast, I'll have about half a year or so to just focus on what is the equivalent of the last book. That'll be a good 25, 30 episodes in comparison to, say, just 5 or 6 episodes for Enemy in Shadows. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I was disappointed with Uber's Right ties to the Enemy fading away into an afterthought. I mean, it's not a surprise. The story that was being built there was one that I put in place, and I wasn't there anymore to say, don't forget this, don't forget that, don't forget this. Other people came in, they had stories that they wanted to create, that they wanted to add. And as new developers come in, they'll go in a different direction. And it's almost inevitable. Urok says, I watched a live stream this afternoon with 4 or 5 voice actors. Yeah, I almost watched that too, but I was too busy. Real strength of the game is their contribution. Yeah, I completely agree. Was it a good stream? Because if it is, I imagine I'll be able to catch it somewhere online. Right, so nothing else to say there. I'm going to jump into my highlights and my shades, and then I'm going to add a little bit of color. So let's go on these. Again, as before, we're not worrying too much about these being super neat. What's much more important is that they tell the stories of the individual areas with a quick shade, a quick highlight. I'm not going to highlight the outer walls, much like last time. I didn't highlight them then either. I'll worry about doing those when I do the whole walls. I'm going to add shade around that, give it an idea of depth and height around that. And this makes it kind of pop. When you've done all your highlights and shades, it very quickly stands out and makes it feel a little bit more 3D. All it is just some faded off color off to the edge, with light presumably coming from a northwesterly direction, which for anyone who knows anything can very quickly realize that that makes no sense at all. We've discussed that in previous streams. It's the magic light of maps, because they look kind of cool when they're highlighted and shaded from this direction. Our eye naturally follows that. And it's not a new thing. There's loads of ancient maps that do this. Indeed, I've got a couple of maps in my house from the 18th century that equally have the false light from the northwest. Right, so let's imagine this as a cool. Into our stonemasons guild, let's add a little bit of highlight and shade around here as well to give the idea that this is not a flat area. There's a little bit of up and down about this whole area. Again, as mentioned before, if you think there's anything else that we should be adding in here or anything else that we could do, drop it in as a comment. I'll check that just after I've done all that. I think probably all the shades, but before I do the highlights. This is taking quite a bit. There's a fair number of these. One not there. Okay, so we still haven't figured out some potential minor deity. I think as we move down to the next part of the slum, we can definitely drop something into the flooded area, and perhaps we'll create ourselves some form of minor god or godling that is worshipped in these here parts concerning marshes. Got to remember that some 75% or more of the River Reich banks aren't banks. It just falls into marsh. Some of them are very big, like the marshes around, say, Altdorf or Karaberg, or, say, Castle Reitgard. Others are much smaller, but the entire length of the Reich is just this big, swollen, marshy river. So having a god, perhaps one tied to Grandfather Reich in some fashion or another, perhaps not, that represents the marshes and the bogs and all the life that lives there and the sort of creatures that you might get. We could get ourselves quite an interesting one potentially out of that. Makes for a super simple write-up, because you're writing it as a cult. You can just do yourself a one-page sheet, similar to the one-page write-ups that you find inside the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 core rulebook, where you get basically a quick breakdown of the cult, its important figures, where it's based, and then you can write just 6 blessings, which are often super easy to come up with, just 6. And you've built yourself an entire minor cult in probably less than an evening. And I'm always up for that. And if we can think of a good one that will work that, I'd be well up for including that in our Lorehammery goodness. Because I do like a good minor god or 5. Okay, we're getting close to being done on these shades. And I'll go check the comments, and there's nothing else that's jumping out from that. I will then do my highlights. We'll add a little bit of color, and then we'll step back and take a look at all the awesome that we've created. I'm going to get my roads layer and remove some of the roady bits here, so this looks more like filth and muck that has gathered in this old plaza. Like it. Okay. Have I missed any shadows? Because I was doing that just a little bit too quickly for my own good. Noticed in the last stream from last week that I missed a few shadows. I was a little bit disappointed with myself. Went back and fixed those afterwards. Yeah, that'll do. We've got enough there to give the idea, the impression of this place. Yeah. Okay, cool. Check the comments, of which we've got very few. Excellent. Oxcuter says, yes, worth watching for their part. It should be on Twitch or YouTube to watch, but yeah, I'll be around somewhere. Oxcuter then says, a well, there are not enough wells. Yeah, I mean, this area is so boggy that, I mean, it's almost water all over the place anyway. And there's lots of small things that could be wells, so I'm not too worried about showing them this part, but in the richer part, I'm going to probably mark out at least 2 of them, particularly up on the hill, as important locations. Yelp says wells are for the most part too small to show up on that scale. Yes, I loosely agree with that, but I think we can go for a couple of really big blocky ones when we go up into the richer part. There's some really nice examples of those here in Edinburgh as well, where they're really sizable and they would show on a map of this size. Yeah, then adds, I keep wanting something that doesn't fit this area, something that should be out of place, but I'm drawing all blanks tonight. That's okay. Don't worry about it, Yalab. Right, let's pull out, have a quick check. Yep, that's looking all right. Let's go get our shades in place. I mean, our highlights in place now. And drop brush size, don't know about that. Let's check that looks all right. It does, but I want to actually have that brush. There we go. And again, like before, this is not meant to be neat and tidy. This is just giving us a little bit of zing to try and ground our buildings into the reality of the lighting that we've built. Again, if you want to know how I'm doing all of these things and what techniques I'm using, there is a tutorial over on the Rookery right now that you can just go download and have a little watch, or at least you can go watch it. It's on Vimeo, as I recall. And that will show you everything that I'm doing on this map. I'm not doing anything on this map that I didn't show in that tutorial. That has made this map a little bit more of a challenge than it might normally have been, because I like to zip around doing different techniques for different areas. But at the same point, it's given it a certain purity and it's made it super fast to do as I'm chatting away. And given that we've gone for such a chat-heavy version for this stream, it's probably a good thing that I can zip through the mapping parts relatively quickly. I missed out the shading that one. Pop one like that. That'll do. Anyway, let's get back on that. And I missed the shade there too. And all the way down here. Completely missed all of that section. That'll do. Right, back to my highlights. Okay. One of the PCs in my game, given that we've been talking so much about Ubersreich, is a young Freud. And I think that is going to be super, super fun to see in practice. As I'm sure you can imagine, starting not far away from Altdorf, that puts him in a particularly unique predicament. Given that if you've read the Ubersreich book, you'll be aware of exactly what some folks think about House Jungfreud and what should be done with them. And he is a member of that family. His father has retreated to Newfallion Castle, where he has allied himself with the Trotts by organizing a marriage between one of the Trott daughters and his son. The Trotts are not an ancient bloodline of the Reichland, unlike the Jungfreuds, who are arguably the oldest bloodline of the Reichland, depending on who you speak to. Speak to a Jungfreud, though, and they'll pretty much claim they are. But isn't that always the case, eh? They also claim that Sigmar was born right beside Ubersreich, so you can decide yourself as to how reliable that piece of information is. I think I mentioned that inside the Ubersreich book, as I recall, when I was writing the background sections for the back. All right, that's our highlights in place. Let's check if there's any comments. There's a couple. Reichtum der Erde, God of recycling. We are definitely doing something down there that's close to recycling. That sounded very much like, don't worry about it, Yalab. You never had any good ideas in the first place. That's not how I meant it to come across, Yalab. I apologize if that's how it came over. Yalab then adds, this stream probably doesn't even make the top 3 of the most chatting, least mapping streams so far, but the conversation is half the fun of those anyway. Yeah, it totally is. I do enjoy the chat. Hey, it's Mark. Hey, Mark. How you doing, man? So glad that you made it. We are nearing the end of finishing off a slum district down in the south of the city, which I'm just about to pull out on and take a look at and see if I want to do anything more to it. I do want to add some color to those areas, so I'm going to do that now. We have all manner of crazy ideas come in through the course of this stream. Many of which I'm quite looking forward to implementing as we move down into the boggier part, particularly when we start thinking about the potentials for spirits, because we've had quite a lot of chat about different spirits and how they may be manifesting. We're going to have ourselves a big giant tree man at the very least. And that's going to be fun, I think. What's happened here? There we go. I'm going to add a little bit of color to some of this to support what we're doing elsewhere. Let's now add some horrible browny yucks for the midden piles that are around this area. I'll leave it relatively loose in terms of detail so people can decide exactly how bad it isn't or isn't themselves. And we can support that with a nice textual description when we pop over to World Anvil. Okay, let's just take off Mark's comment there. Right, so I'm pretty pleased with where this is sort of sitting. If anyone has any other idea for anything here, now's the time because we're about to move on. At the very least, I'm going to organize our giant tree man that's going to be here. And yes, Mark, we have a giant tree man that's going to be permanently ensconced inside the city. The only thing that hasn't been cut down in this local area, mostly. But before I do that, let's get, in fact, I'll be part of doing that. Let's get our tree layer and organize our big tree man. Yeah. So I'm thinking it's about there. And branching out in some directions. I'll add a little bit of extra to that in a moment. I think actually I'll add a new layer above, copy that layer style, and then probably copy it over to that paste layer style for some extra TH to go higher. Again, if you want to know how I'm doing this, the tutorial that we did for the Rookery will explain it all for you. Give it that little bit of extra height. Yeah, that sort of works. Right, let's drop a gigantic shade in that as well. Do I want to do it like this? I think I probably do. So let's up the size of that to an 8 and drop in a big tree shadow for what we have here. Right. I'm going to quickly line in around the edges of that and be quite pleased. It's like the easiest sort of half location we've ever had. I'm going to add another layer above that as well so that I can, add in some. Given that we've got like a feature tree here, we don't want it to look like all the rest, and we want this one to look like it's big with branches coming out of it in various directions. But as far as the local populace is concerned, this is just a tree. It's just a tree, man. Nothing to worry about. I can't believe I said that. Okay, and let's ground it into the surrounding area. It's got roots that extend right out into the surrounding land. And one of the only reasons that this part of town hasn't completely collapsed to the bog, the amount of water that this thing can suck up is certainly something, but I think it's now reaching the point where it's a bit too much, beginning to collapse there. We've got a building that was originally built here, and the roots have come up through it, I think. Yeah. Yeah, love it. Love it, love it, love it. I think we've got an idea of what this place looks like now. Let's just mark that off and straighten that edge for when we do the barge building in a later stream. Just marking the road in so it's nice and clear. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Quite like that. I've forgotten who suggested that we do a big tree man down here, but whoever you are, you rock. That was a good idea. I like it. I'm going to add just a little bit of extra to it so that we can definitely see that there's a bit more of a height to this than in comparison to the others. This is a big location. Cool. Let's then add a little bit of color underneath it. And we'll be done that. And I'll jump back into the comments again. And then we'll make a call as to whether we're stopping at this point. Because I reckon we've done pretty well this evening. Let's get my green. That's really a bit too green. Drop that onto that brush, please. Yeah, that's a bit better. We lapse into bogginess on the other side. Yeah. Then go into our water layer. Fill that in there. Love it. And I'll do a slight bit of highlighting. We'll call that bit done and we'll take a look at what we've got, check the comments, and make a call as to what we're going to do next. So for highlight shade, there we go. I also are perhaps influencing my decision on this. Whoa, that was not the brush I thought I had. Lindsay has just returned home from doing her sword swooshing. I can hear her in the background thumping around in the house. And as I said earlier, I've got some PC portraits that I want to draw because I need them ready for tomorrow when Erin's popping over. So let's take a look. Is that enough? I mean, it's enough for the moment. Let's, yeah, let's, they're not quite there yet. I want to also do the walls. The wall don't have any color on them yet. Let's just quickly do that too. As we mentioned before in the previous stream, our walls are all being marked in yellow so that they're very quick to spot. And you can tell that these are proper fortifications rather than just weird building shapes. When we're dealing with such a small scale, one of the biggest issues is misreading the detail. So using a color code means that that detail is super clear. Now, if our map was bigger, that's not as much of an issue because you can just draw it with more detail and it's very clear what everything is. But when you're dealing with a map of this scale where the actual size of it is going to be, let's go actual pixels, really super tiny. It's not going to be that small. It's about that. I mean, all these locations are pretty small. Let's go to 100%. That is 100%. That's how small they are in terms of it. I mean, you're looking at maybe like 6 A4 sheets when it's done. It's not that big. All right, we've got ourselves a nice big tree down there. We've set ourselves up for doing the bog over in the corner. I like that. Let's have a quick check with our last bits. Oh, I think there we go. And circling back to the game I'll be running, have the PC's list finalized. Excellent, barring a last-minute change of heart. And we're rolling with 3 humans. You're going for a protagonist, a grave robber, a bounty hunter, and an ogre watchman. Interesting. Good point, Martin. Martin just said add some vegetation. I have not added my vegetation, so let's do that too. Is it this brush? It is not. I'm not sure what that brush is. Let's try that one. Yeah, that's it. Right, let's add a little bit of vegetation around as well, because I agree we need that. This is the sort of place where we're going to have it, maybe even a little bit, and now that makes it seem too permanent. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. That brush is a bit too big, and we'll shrink that down a bit. Into the ruins. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me, Martin. Appreciate it. Just a little bit of extra around the corners here. Well, that sort of brings it to life. Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Alan says, could one of the midden piles be known colloquially as the midden ball? Very possibly, yes. Especially because when midden ball feels so closely. Always cute adds, I would have Acorn the squirrel from Blood Bowl living up in the tree, man. Acorn. Oh, that name's stupid. I love it. Martin is just creeping past my bedtime, so I'm going to head off. I think I'm probably about to do the same. Martin says, great stream as always. Thank you very much for saying so. We'll catch up with the rest tomorrow. Good luck with it all. And then Mark adds, perhaps irrelevant, but I've always wondered, what's the story behind the name Hipimices? I'm going to do that in another thread. Next time you catch me on one of the streams, ask me then, because I think I'm going to call it a night tonight. It's not a long story, but it's long enough I don't want to go into it right now, because I'm quite pleased with where we're at. There is a story, and it's to do with role-playing. Right, so let's pull out. We have finished the second section of the bog area down in the bottom, which was the plan. Next week, we'll go over to the third part of the bog. And if we're lucky, we'll also do the barge building, because I think that bog area is going to be quite easy to draw. It's also smaller than the area that we did today. So we might actually get all the barge building done too. As always, if you could please like, share, subscribe to the channel, all those other things. Hiya. I'm just saying bye to everyone.
Okay, bye everyone.
Yeah, you might have heard Lindsay there in the background. That would be awesome. But beyond that, thanks all for turning up. You are the best. For those of you who managed to last all the way through, I salute you. For those of you who've come in much later, an absolute delight that you made it. And for those of you who are watching it much, much later, hi. And if you'd like to come along to watch one of the streams live, make sure that you do so. We're going to be here every single Thursday from 7 o'clock UK time, doing ourselves all the mapping thing. But beyond that, I shall bid you all adieu. Thanks all. I shall talk to you later with a quick bye. Bye. Hi, Lindsay. Everyone's saying hi, Lindsay, by the way.
Hi.
And y'all have been through the nice. Thanks, Andy. Great stream as always. Thank you so much for saying so. Bye-bye, chat. And bye-bye to you all. I'll see you next time.